772. Chen Pinggan found a bustling inn to settle down. He still needed to pay with gold and silver. The three of them stayed for 3 days and spent a total of 2 taels and 8 chen of silver. The waiter took out the scale and cut the silver with a small pair of scissors skillfully. When Chen Pinggan saw this item, he couldn't help but think of the Yang family's shop in the early years. Other than being used to cut silver, it was also used to weigh some expensive and rare herbs. Therefore, when Chen Pinggan was young, every time he saw the shop assistant taking out this item to weigh some herbs, he would carry a large basket on his back and stand under the tall counter. He would purse his lips tightly and grab the rope on his shoulders with both hands. His eyes would be especially bright, and he would only feel that half a day's hard work, wind, sun, rain, and so on, was nothing. His thoughts were chaotic and he could not control them. Because the scale in front of him was a scale, Chen Pinggan thought of the light scale and the measurement of the world today. Naturally, he remembered the group of qi cultivators that Song Jisin mentioned at the Great Blasphemy Temple. The scales, ebony poles, and several small copper weights on the counter of the inn were obviously ordinary items at the foot of the mountain. Therefore, after Chen Pinggan glanced at them, he realized that they were the same as the books in Entry City. They were not real objects, so he didn't think too much about it. Pei Qian had a set of scales herself. 2 of the weights were engraved with "Never lose money and only earn money for her." Therefore, at this moment, it was as if they were related, like meeting an old friend in a foreign land. Pei Qian paid more attention than Chen Pinggan and looked at it carefully. Suddenly, she whispered to Chen Pinggan, "Master, this set of scales uses a curled horn pole. Ordinary people can't afford to use it." Chen Pinggan laughed in his heart. Most likely, it is an item from a wealthy family that has fallen into the hands of the common people. Unfortunately, no matter how expensive the material is, it is an illusion. We can't take it away. Pei Qian nodded. She thought for a while and asked, "There is a small line of words on the scale. Shanyang is generous, the palace treasury is respectful. Master, is there a saying here?" Chen Pinggan shook his head. "I don't know, but since it is made by the palace treasury, it must be an item of the palace. I just don't know the specific dynasty." Pei Qian asked, "Master, after we settle down in the inn, I will go to the bookstore alone to find out what is Shanyang is generous." Chen laughed. But Pei Qian was willing to explore. "Chen." He nodded. Chen Pinggan asked for 2 rooms from the inn, one for himself. After taking a seat in the room, he opened the cotton package and placed it on the table. Pei Qian bade farewell to his master and left the inn alone. He ran to the bookstore in Entry City to examine the origin of the strange inscription, "Generosity of the Mountain Sun." Xiaomi ran into the house and placed her beloved green bamboo cane on the table. She was at Chen Pinggan's side, standing on the bench and accompanying the good mountain chieftain to look at the treasures he had picked up. The little girl was a little envious and asked if she could play with them. Chen Pinggan was flipping through the booklet given by the bearded man. He smiled and nodded. She wasn't interested in the scrolls or paperweights at all. In the end, she began to admire the narcissus basin that she had taken a liking to long ago. She raised both of her hands up high and exclaimed in admiration. She even used her face to rub against the slightly cool porcelain basin. It was really cool. Chen Pinggan opened a page of the booklet and smiled. "If you like it, I will give it to you. But let me say it first. The basin is fake. You can't take it away. You can only stay on the ferry for a few days. Don't be sad." This porcelain basin had a good origin. In the booklet given by the bearded man, it was known as a narcissus cultivation cave. The bottom number was 800 water descendants. It was a bit like a relative of the small gilded water tank. It could be regarded as a natural water residence. It was similar to the water hall and dragon boat that Liu Zhongruan secretly salvaged with the help of Zhu Lian in his early years on Pearl Island. Unfortunately, the Narcissus Basin was also a kind of illusion refined by the immortal master. Xiaomi held the Narcissus Basin and shook her head hard. "I just like it, so I want to take a few more glances. Even if the basin is real, I don't want it. Otherwise, if I take it to Luorpa Mountain, I will be worried about thieves every day. It will delay my patrol." Chen Pinggan repeatedly flipped through the booklet. There was not much content and he had nothing to do. According to the booklet, there were many detailed records of these objects. Not only the Narcissus basin, but also the bundle of dead plum blossom branches, the ebony paperweight of Shu Yi, as well as the strangely shaped moon fishing vessel and the dressing scroll. They were all just one of the links in the clues of opportunity. They were only used as a bridge to connect the other two things. In the bag shop of the bearded man, Chen Ping'an actually only had one Cloud Dream Pine ancient bow. It was a genuine object and had already been obtained by Chen Ping'an. However, its rank was still hard to determine. Moreover, Chen Ping'an felt that this bow was a bit troublesome. As for the small gilded water jar that was used as the gate sea in the palace, it was given to Xiao Baohuan by the Taoist priest Greenox for some reason to not break the rules. After that, it was a real opportunity. In the Guigong city where the emperors and monarchs gathered, Xiao Baohuan could ask for a title in a sense to turn the water jar into a real thing. The depth of the water in the water jar depended on Xiao Baohuan's ability to ask for a title with a certain emperor in the Guigong city. On the booklet, it said that this object could complement the Dragon King basket. The Dragon King basket could suppress all the dragons in the world. However, the Gate Sea could use the dragon's breath as bait to raise all the aquatic creatures in the world. Raising them in the water jar was a kind of half water on the mountain. One catch and one raise, it was seamless. Chen Ping'an smiled. When we go back to the Mute Lake in the North Continent, we can stay there for a few more days. Are you happy? Xiaomi smiled from ear to ear, but said, it's just so. I'm happy that the mouth of the bowl is big. She placed the daffodil bowl on the table, leaned on the table, and added, when we go back to Luopo Mountain, it'll be as big as the table. Chen Ping'an joked, that senior brother's Were of mine has a bad temper, especially towards strangers. It's hard to talk to him. Even with me, his junior brother, senior brother's Were has never smiled. That's why I have a whole new level of respect for you. Xiaomi rested her chin on her arm and asked softly, Good Mountain Lord, do you miss the Mountain Lord's wife? Chen Ping'an couldn't help but smile. He nodded and said, Of course I miss her. Xiaomi's eyes curved as she said, I don't think so. Chen Ping'an put down the booklet, picked up the ebony paperweight and played with it in his hand. He said as if he was joking, You have to make yourself not think that way so that you won't think that way. Do you think you'll miss her? Xiaomi frowned and said cheekily, If Mountain Lord says so, then so be it. Chen Ping'an looked at the booklet. Actually, it was as if he had inherited dragon-bearded guest's bag shop. He could also set up a stall on the ferry to welcome customers. Standing up and putting down the ebony paperweight, Chen Ping'an took out a lantern-raising talisman. It floated in the air and slowly burned. Then, he walked to the window. Previously, there was a talisman in the booklet. When dragon-bearded guest received the booklet, he was well aware of it. However, he still covered it up and didn't return it to Chen Ping'an. This meant that Chen Ping'an's actions didn't break the rules of the night ferry. After dragon-bearded guest rode his donkey out of the city, the talisman in the booklet disappeared without a trace. If you don't hit a wall, you won't know where the boundaries of the rules are. After Chen Ping'an boarded the night ferry, he still did as the Romans did. Generally speaking, he followed the rules. However, there were still some small things that he had to try. Actually, this was similar to fishing. One needed to set up a nest to lure the fish. One also needed to know the depth of the fish. Moreover, there was a lot of knowledge in fishing, and there was a lot of skill in fishing. At first, Chen Ping'an's goal was very simple. It was to rescue all the cultivators on the ferry in the North Continent within a month, leave the night ferry, and return to Howran together. However, on this city, Xiao Baohuan had set up traps time and time again. Then, there was Li Shilang who treated his guests coldly. Chen Ping'an really didn't believe in evil. Then, he arm wrestled and gave it a try. Chen Ping'an counted silently in his heart. When he turned around, a lantern-raising talisman had just burned out. It was exactly the same as when he entered the city. There wasn't the slightest difference. Previously, on the path where the Daoist was conferred the title of monarch, the two of them met on a narrow path. Perhaps it was because Chen Ping'an had always been very respectful towards the elder and had accumulated a lot of illusory luck. After a few rounds of back and forth, the two of them did not exchange any sword techniques or Dao techniques. After a round of friendly talk, Chen Pinggan instead used a temporary hand-drawn drawing of the true shape of the 5 great mountains to make a deal with the green ox daoist. The 5 mountains painting that Chen Pinggan drew was extremely ancient in shape and style. It was quite different from all the 5 mountains paintings in the future. The true form of the 5 mountains painting was first obtained by the master of planting in the lotus flower blessed land. Later, it was handed over to Cao Qinglang for safekeeping. It was then placed in the lotus flower blessed land of the Luorpa mountain. Of course, Chen Pinggan wasn't unfamiliar with this. The Lord finally got what he wanted and was greatly gratified. The skinny old daoist had a whole new level of respect for Chen Pinggan, this young man who was like a lucky star. In exchange, Chen Pinggan knew that the Lord was only traveling to another city, so he asked the old daoist to help bring the longsword knight traveling to another city. Not only that, the old daoist who was in a good mood took the initiative to do a few small deals with Chen Pinggan. Both sides had questions and answers. The Lord told Chen Pinggan a few secrets about the ferry. Of course, the Lord only said some things that could be said, such as the way to leave the boat, the way to leave the city, how Xiao Baohuan became the lord of the city, and what benefits there were to become the lord of the city. The old immortal smiled and said nothing. The longsword knight traveling that was no longer with him had always been connected to Chen Pinggan's heart. It was like a flickering light in the dark of the night. In the dark of the night, Chen Pinggan could clearly see the passerby. As long as Chen Pinggan was ruthless, he could slash the world of the ferry with his sword. Chen Pinggan was confident that he could let Pei Qian and Xiaomi leave the ferry first. At the same time, he could also go to the city where the Lord was and continue to wander around the night ferry. When the time came, he would let Pei Qian return to the ferry of the draped hemp sect and directly send a flying sword message to the Taihui sword sect and Crouching Ground Peak. In the North Continent, Chen Pinggan knew many friends and respected seniors. Xiaomi stood on the long bench and thought of something. She was overjoyed. She covered her mouth with her 2 small hands and laughed. "Good mountain master, we are going to travel the Jianghu together again. This time, let's go meet the mountain deities in that immortal mansion. Don't get chased out because you don't know how to recite poems." Chen Pinggan said seriously, "How is that possible? These years, my ability to compose poems has improved tremendously. I am not afraid of anyone. Xiaomi, I am not bragging to you. In the past, at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, I met an old cultivator who thought he was a scholar. He was at the 14th level. I think he used the alias Lu Feian. Anyway, he admired my reputation for poetry and took the initiative to find me at the top of the city wall. He said that my poems were in tune with the rhythm and were shockingly flat. He was very impressed and admitted defeat. That is why whenever he saw me, he would be worried. When Xiaomi heard this, she was shocked. She quickly clapped her hands and was in high spirits. Amazing, amazing. Sigh, it was a pity that all her martial arts skills were useless. Because of this trip to Mute Lake, Xiaomi had secretly asked Old Chef for a few poems and wrote them all in a book. Old Chef was still the most meticulous. At that time, he had asked Xiaomi if she was the one who came up with the poems, right? At that time, Xiaomi had a confused look on her face and was confused. Was it a hammer? How would she know what it was? Julian asked her to copy it down on a piece of paper. Otherwise, she would give herself away. Xiaomi was enlightened. When she was copying the poems one by one, Old Chef was at the side eating melon seeds. He patiently answered Xiaomi's questions about the words in the poems, how to read them, and what they meant. Xiaomi asked Old Chef, "Did you copy all these from books?" Old Chef said no, they were all ideas he came up with on the spot. He was in a hurry, and it was a side branch of learning. At that time, Xiaomi was anxious. She said don't implicate the good mountain lord and her and get looked down by others. Old Chef said no, he didn't. He even said that when he was in his hometown, many people said that his poems were fished out from the moon in the water, plucked from the willow at the ferry, and picked up from the wine jar. Therefore, they were still a little heavy. He was able to do as he pleased, but it was a divine language that many famous poets yearned for. Xiaomi was skeptical, But in the end, she still believed old chef's words. That night, under the light on the table, the little girl was copying the words while swinging her legs. Old chef was eating melon seeds while talking endlessly. That was why Luo Po Mountain was so popular with Ju Meili. Even though the good mountain lord was often not at home, there was still Pei Qian, old chef, Sister Nuanshu, and Jing Qing. To this cave-dwelling realm right guardian of Luo Po Mountain, the Great Wall of Swordchi was also a very good place. In Ju Meili's heart, it was the third best place in the world after Luo Po Mountain and Mute Lake. One was a hometown where she had many friends, the other was a small hometown in the Jianghu, and the other was a place where she, the Mute Lake water monster, accidentally became famous in both worlds. Chen Pinggan stretched out his hand and gestured to Xiaomi, who was standing on the stool. When we go out and walk the Jianghu, we have to be steady and reserved. Xiaomi sat down on the bench and leaned on the table again. She was a little worried. She frowned and said softly, "Good mountain lord, I don't seem to be able to help at all." Outside Luo Po Mountain, at this point, the black-clothed little girl scratched her head and refused to continue. She was just a little embarrassed. Some people said that she was just a cave-dwelling realm cultivator with an unknown background. It was simply a big joke for a little monster to become the mountain protector of Luo Po Mountain. In fact, she was quite sad for many years, because those rumors were true. She was just afraid that Sister Nuanshu and the others would be worried, so she pretended that nothing happened. Chen Pinggan smiled and reached out to rub Xiaomi's head. He guessed roughly and asked tentatively, "Did someone say that your realm was not high, so they laughed at you and talked behind your back?" After returning to Luo Po Mountain, no one really told Chen Pinggan about this matter. It was such a big matter, and no one had said anything. He had to remember this. From Kui Dongshan to Pei Qian, to Old Chef, and Chen Lingjun, none of them could escape. Only little Nuan Shu, he could forget about it. Xiaomi nodded and said carefully, "Good mountain lord, it's not that I'm afraid of carrying the burden. I carry the golden carrying pole every day to secretly remind myself that the responsibility is big. It's just that it's such a big official, why don't we change it to someone else? I think Jing Qing is not bad. He also likes to be an official. I think it's quite suitable for him to be the mountain protector. It'll sound better if word gets out. After all, Jing Qing is in the nascent soul realm." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Let him be the mountain protector of Luo Po Mountain. No matter how bold our master Chen is, he wouldn't dare to have such an idea. Moreover, Ling Jun is even more unwilling to compete with you for this official title." Even if Chen Lingjun dared to be the sect master of a lesser sect, in front of a large group of people who were either chopped to death with a sword or punched to death with a few fists during the meeting in the Hall of Patriarchs, this guy could still put on a posture of who else but me, but he did not dare to be the sect protector. There was one good thing about Chen Lingjun, which was that he valued loyalty the most. He dared to compete for anything, such as the lord of a lower sect. He was willing to give anything. When Luo Po Mountain was most short of money, Chen Lingjun actually came up with a lot of ways to take out his family's wealth. According to Zhu Lian, Master Chen was really struggling to make ends meet during those years. He was so poor that he couldn't even straighten his back when he was with Wei Shanjun. However, Chen Lingjun wouldn't snatch anything that already belonged to others. Not to mention Xiaomi's mountain protector of Luo Po Mountain, Chen Lingjun wouldn't even touch the small benefits and advantages. In short, Chen Lingjun was an experienced Jianghu person who would rather suffer than lose face. Perhaps even Chen Lingjun himself didn't know that whether it was Shanjun Wei Pai's side, whom he had recorded countless times, or Master Zhong Qiu's side, whom he didn't have much contact with, they actually had a very high opinion of him. Moreover, in the depths of Chen Pinggan's heart, the seat of the left protector of Luo Po Mountain, which had always been empty, was long prepared for Chen Lingjun. In the secret letter sent to Cao Qinglang, this matter was mentioned. After this guy succeeded in profaning, if Luo Po Mountain confirmed that he couldn't return to his hometown, this matter would be settled. However, later on, when Chen Pinggan returned to Haoran World and arrived at Luo Po Mountain, he saw that Chen Lingjun was indeed a little too arrogant when he walked, so he deliberately didn't mention this matter. Anyway, good things weren't afraid of being late. He would just leave Master Chen, who had friends all over the world, hanging out for a few more days. Chen Pinggan comforted, on Luo Po Mountain, who has the highest position? Whose words are the most trustworthy? Xiaomi grinned and said, of course it's the good mountain lord. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, on Luo Po Mountain, whether the position is high or low doesn't depend on the level, only the fame. Then tell me, who can be the guardian of the mountain to convince the masses? Xiaomi was in high spirits, but she deliberately sighed heavily, crossed her arms, and raised her small head high. This is a little worrying. It's impossible not to be an official. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. Yes. Pei Qian returned to the inn, knocked on the door, and entered. Chen Pinggan happened to be casually asking Xiaomi why she wanted to go to Red Candle Town to play. Logically speaking, Red Candle Town was very close to Luo Po Mountain. The water god of the Chongdan River, Li Jin, who had opened a shop in the town to sell books, also had quite a lot of ties with Luo Po Mountain. Chestun Mountain was also where Wei Pai, the mountain lord of the North Peak, had made his fortune. As for the water god of the Embroidery River, due to her connection with the ghost in wedding clothes, she was no stranger to the Jiyu family of Mud Bottle Alley and Chen Pinggan, so there should be no accidents. Coupled with the water god of the Iron Talisman River, Yang Hua, she also had some very complicated grievances with Chen Pinggan. It was possible to say that the little person who came to Luo Po Mountain regularly for roll call even originated from the Xiang Wang Pavilion of the province. As a result, only the Jade Nectar River remained in the vast territory of the Dragon Province. The other mountain and river organizations all had extremely complicated ties with Luo Po Mountain. Pei Qian immediately became embarrassed. Chen Pinggan, who had not thought too much about it in the beginning, immediately thought about it a little more. Glancing at his first disciple, Pei Qian's eyes darted around. It was exactly the same as when she got caught by Chen Pinggan when she caused trouble when she was young. Xiaomi was confused in a hurry. Afterwards, she played dumb. Why do we want to go to Red Candle Town together? Is there any other reason? Yep, that's a question the size of a melon seed. Haha, didn't I give you the answer earlier? The good mountain lord has a rather bad memory. Actually, it's just that I don't have a lot of money in my pocket, so I can't afford melon seeds. At this point, the little girl couldn't make up any more stories. She could only bitterly turn to look at Pei Qian. Pei Qian had no choice but to use voice transmission to tell his master about the Jade Liquid River incident. He talked about how Chen Lingjun brought out the Dragon King basket, how old chef punched the water god, and how little senior brother visited the underwater residence. Of course, the water god did take the initiative to apologize in the end. However, Pei Qian couldn't help but talk about the scene of Xiaomi strolling alone on the mountain. Xiaomi was really heartless. While walking on the mountain path, she casually grabbed a handful of green leaves and stuffed them into her mouth. Looking left and right, she didn't see anyone. Then, she chewed on the leaves to disperse the stains. From beginning to end, Pei Qian didn't deliberately hide anything. She also didn't exaggerate. Everything was just the truth. After Chen Pinggan heard it, he nodded and said, "Got it." He pretended not to hear Pei Qian's explanation and rubbed Xiaomi's head. He smiled and said, "In the future, when we return to our hometown, we can go to Red Candle Town together. We can also visit the ancestral temple or the underwater residence." Xiaomi smiled and continued to play with the daffodil bowl. Pei Qian took out several books. Each book had a foldable page. He said, "Master, I've found the root of the problem. It's that Liu Chenggui. He's from Shanyang. There are many records of official history and government records. There are records of this person under famous officials, literary circles, water conservancy, and many other entries. However, the length of the records isn't very long. According to the records, it seems that this person was the first to enter the money into the Li when it came to the matter of the imperial concubine. He made this kind of measuring instrument more accurate." Chen Pinggan began to flip through the books. Because Pei Qian had a foldable page, he flipped through the pages very quickly. It seemed that this scholar, Zhu Lian, and the Yellow Flower Monastery's third Prince Liu Maro were all people of the same path. They were proficient in all kinds of calculations and regulations. When Chen Pinggan saw the entry of the monastery, He found that this person had been appointed by the imperial decree to build the jade-clear Zhao Ying Palace and served as the deputy. Other than that, the emperor also sent Liu Chenggui to supervise the transportation of resources. This person had once opened up a waterway. Chen Pinggan understood in his heart. He instantly understood why he met the imperial concubine at the inn and why he almost missed the opportunity. Chen Pinggan's affinity with water and the few calculation books in his possession could be one of the clues. However, the Daoist book that was given out in the city today was most likely the reason why he didn't recognize the imperial concubine. If Pei Qian didn't insist on reading the book, Chen Pinggan definitely wouldn't have cared about the imperial concubine. He wouldn't have seen any inscriptions on the scales. Pei Qian had a complete set of imperial concubine, which was another karma and opportunity that belonged to her. Therefore, she could see the inscriptions. That Yunmeng Changsong bow was indeed a hot potato. Could it be said that many of the karma veins that were illusory and dispensable in the vast world would be greatly highlighted on the night boat? For example, the green ox Daoist priest, Zhao Cheng, who rode an ox cart out of Lizhu Cave, the old master of Donghai Taoist Temple, and the Five Mountains true form painting of the lotus flower blessed land. Pei Qian had read about the Jianghu story of the bearded man and the lame donkey in the romance. When Pei Qian was young, she longed to have a donkey to travel the Jianghu with. Mr. Wusong of the weapon shop, Bai Yi's celestial sword, Tai Bai sword, night traveling sword. Pei Qian looked at her master, who was deep in thought, and asked softly, "Is there trouble?" Chen Pinggan came back to his senses and shook his head with a smile. On the contrary, it has solved a big doubt in your heart. There are already some clues about the way this ferry operates. Originally, Chen Pinggan had already been overwhelmed by the mess in Entry City, overshadowing some of his previous ideas. Now, he was more and more certain that the key to this night boat was the scholar who was talking loudly in the night, especially the monk who was traveling on the same boat and stretched his legs out in the boat. And the boatman who no one would think too much about. Chen Pinggan flipped open the booklet given to him by the bearded man and slowly pondered. There were a total of 12 cities on the night boat. Among them, there were 4 upper cities. Then, there should be 4 middle cities and 4 lower cities. Other than the city master Li Shilang, there was also a deputy city master. The other cities should be more or less the same, with a main and a deputy city. In a city with countless kings, there was the cool summer resort at the north foot of Mount Li, which hid the next opportunity related to the scroll. The chicken and dog city where the Pine Mist Protectorate General Long Bin was at hid clues about the Guangling rest stop chart. In the famous shop, the young shopkeeper who had a debate with the third chief of the Beko Keikyang building, Lu Chen, actually proposed to use a Haoliang blade strengthening gourd to help Chen Pinggan open up a new city. This meant that the number of cities on the ferry was most likely not a fixed number. Otherwise, the possibility of 1 for 1 was too small, because it would deviate from the fundamental purpose of this night boat to collect the knowledge of the world. In addition, Xiao Baojuan's words, especially the fate with the monk and the old woman who sold biscuits, revealed some rules of the Great Way. Most of the living immortals on the ferry seemed to repeat their words and actions. Among the local people on the ferry, only a small group of people were left. For example, the lord of this city, the bearded man, and Mr. Wusong of the weapon shop were exceptions. But in this way, this small group of people seemed to be even more trapped in the prison of the words of mountains and rivers. Year after year, 100 or 1,000 years, it was like they had been reading the same book, waiting for foreigners to board the ferry. Only then would they be able to add and delete some words from time to time. For these old immortals and seniors who had lived for a long time, wouldn't it be even more troublesome? Chen Pinggan took out a piece of white paper from the objects in front of him and wrote down the people he saw, the places he knew, and the key words, as well as the origin and direction of all the clues. When Pei Qian first entered the city, she saw 3 mystical people, the palace maid who hung the lantern, the lady with a fan in the mansion of the small mountain, and a young man with a pair of silver eyes standing on a corridor bridge between the colorful buildings. Most of them were important people in the big cities outside of the city. They were either the deputy city lord or close servants of the city lord like Long Bin and Qin Zidu. Pei Qian watched her master write densely on a piece of white paper. Then, Her master folded his hands in his sleeves and stared at the paper in silence. Pei Qian said softly, "Master, the mountain certificate that Li Shilang handed over." This was a question, but it wasn't a question. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It means that we already have a place to stay in the city, just like the mansion on Osmanthus Island." Because the mountain certificate was changed from a mountain certificate to a mountain certificate, it was equivalent to a land deed inspected by the government at the foot of the mountain. "It's just that I don't plan to stay there. If there's a chance, I'll still sell it back to Li Shilang. Otherwise, it'll be difficult for the city lord to not see it and not feel annoyed. In the end, it'll hurt the harmony between us." Pei Qian frowned and sensed something strange. She immediately took out the mountain certificate made of green paper from her sleeve and saw the words "Stop Pavilion" on the back. At the same time, a voice resounded in the room, "Sword Immortal Chen, if you don't buy QOZ now, it'll be too late again." Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "City Lord Li, see no evil, hear no evil, am I right?" Li Shilang smiled and replied, "Can't I see all the knowledge in the world? Is it a good thing that everyone treasures their own knowledge? As for hearing no evil, you and I know it very well. There's no need to beat around the bush. You deliberately mentioned me first, and I'll help you verify this matter. For the next 3 days, you're on your own." Pei Qian looked at Chen Pinggan, wanting to ask his master if the words of this city lord could be trusted. After all, Li Shilang was brainless and didn't seem to like his master from the beginning. Instead, it was the city where Long Bin was located that seemed to know his master's identity as a hidden official. Furthermore, he specially came to the city and took the initiative to ask for a complete seal molt. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's better to have no books than to believe in books." Pei Qian asked, "Master, what did QOZ say?" In fact, Pei Qian didn't understand why Li Shilang only wanted to talk about this. His master said that this item was an illusory item. What was the meaning of gain and loss? But to say that a city lord deliberately cheated them of their money, it didn't seem to make sense. That was too boring and despicable. Chen Pinggan explained, "The value of the mace doesn't lie in the actual mace itself, but in the scale that Liu Chengui painstakingly engraved, as well as the scales of various sizes. If you meet someone who knows what's what, it will become valuable, very valuable. Even if you can't take it away, QOZ will be fine. Master can also help you to accurately draw the scale spacing according to the original standards, and then sew and restore those slightly worn scales. That's why Li Shilang reminded you like this." Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment, and said to Pei Qian seriously, "But this is your opportunity to earn money. Whether you fight for it or not, it's fine." Pei Qian said without hesitation, "Then forget it, I'm too lazy to make another trip." Zhu Mili immediately said, Pei Qian, I still have a lot of gold ingots and silver ingots in my pocket. Heroes are just waiting for my order to go out and show off their skills. Don't worry about not having enough money." Pei Qian pinched Mili's cheeks, "That's not the case." Chen Pinggan asked Pei Qian to stay in the room and walked out alone. At the inn's counter, he saw a group of people. He was a little surprised, because like him, they were obviously foreigners who had just boarded the ship not long ago. A young Confucian scholar with a bookcase on his back was calm. He had a scholar's jade pendant on his waist. Chen Pinggan was no stranger to it. Zhong Kuei and the gentleman from the Great Wall of Sword Qi also had it. The style was the same, but the seal characters were different. The Confucian scholar was discussing with the shop assistant how to buy and sell QOZ. In addition, there was a young Taoist priest with a peachwood sword on his back. Beside him stood a young monk, carrying a Buddhist shrine covered with cloth. It was the accompanying Buddha. The young Taoist priest looked particularly handsome and elegant. He was laughing softly with his companion, the little monk, and said, "I heard that there is a guy in the city on this ferry who claims to be the reincarnation of some Buddha. He must be a heretic without a doubt. Should we leave the bookworm aside and slay the demon?" The young monk was silent. When the three of them saw Chen Pinggan, they were not surprised. Chen Pinggan's attention was more on an old man with a sword standing not far away from the inn. He was undoubtedly a sword immortal, and could even be an immortal. The young Taoist priest with the peachwood sword had already retracted his hand into his sleeve. He pinched his fingers and did a mental calculation. Then, he immediately shuddered. His fingers felt as if they touched burning charcoal. He smiled bitterly and took the initiative to apologize to Chen Pingan. "I'm sorry for my rudeness. This place is really too strange. Everyone is strange. I'm trembling all the way. Please don't let me pass." It was indeed strange. Although they had special identities and duties, so they could pass unimpeded on this ferry, but if they wanted to change cities, they still needed to solve a riddle and pass through layers upon layers of checkpoints. There was no shortcut. Fortunately, this fellow Yuan Yang seemed to know everything, so he was able to break through like a hot knife through butter. In the end, he was able to peel away the silk from the cocoon and follow the network that was constantly becoming clearer, all the way to this entry city that was the most difficult for outsiders to enter. Otherwise, this noble from Mount Longhu's celestial master residence felt that even if he had a life-saving talisman, he wouldn't be able to leave for at least 70 to 80 years if he were to travel alone on this ferry. He would obediently wander around like a ghost going around a wall. At most, he would go on a sightseeing tour. Those few cities were actually as big as the mountains and rivers of a dynasty. On the way, someone would hold a lantern with the words 3 Great Emperors written on it. It was red and black and hung above the door. It could be used to resolve misfortune. Some people used small incense sticks to offer candles. They prayed with every step they took until they reached the top of the mountain. There was a long-faced man who sold wine. Once he drank too much, he went crazy with the bookkeeper of the wine shop. He said that he would exterminate 10 generations of his family. There was a crazy man named Bu Zhun. He held a bunch of burnt bamboo slips in his hand. He asked everyone he met if they could fill in the words. They would definitely reward him handsomely. There were courier riders who set off from the capital. They whipped their horses and whipped their horses. They posted imperial edicts on the snow-white walls of the courier stations and roadside pavilions. It complemented each other with poems inscribed on the walls by the traveling officials. There were also sedan bearers who were drenched in sweat during the day. They gambled in the middle of the night and did not know what fatigue was. This made the officials who were reading at night in the side rooms shake their heads. Especially in the Benmo city in front of the city of entries, the young Taoist priest was at the edge of a large river with rolling yellow sand. He saw with his own eyes a large group of officials who came from a clear background being thrown into the rolling river by armored warriors like dumplings. However, there was a scholar standing in the distance with a happy smile. Chen Pingan nodded in greeting and smiled. "It's fine. We're just watching the fun and not joining in." Magnanimous. The young celestial master of Mount Longhu praised the green-clothed man. Then, he gently tapped the young monk's shoulder with his elbow. "You guys are chatting so well. Why don't you say a few words?" The young monk continued to practice silent meditation. However, he glanced at Chen Pingan. The young monk put his palms together. Chen Pingan returned the greeting. The Confucian scholar spent a few taels of silver to buy the steward from the inn. The young Taoist priest asked, "How is it?" The Confucian scholar shook his head. "It's not much. It's better than nothing." The 3 of them walked out of the inn. The old sword immortal on the street silently followed the 3 young people to the city gate. However, this time, they were different from the monk carrying the load and the donkey-riding bearded man. They were escorted by the patrolling cavalry. Chen Pingan stood at the door with his hands folded in his sleeves. As he said, he was just watching the fun. He watched the 4 of them leave from afar. Clearly, the 3 of them left the city directly to leave the night boat. In the city, outside a small pavilion, Li Shilang looked at the signboard and stopped. He sighed. There were more than a dozen maids beside him. Qin Zidu was only one of them. Apart from them, there was only a white-haired old scholar in green. He smiled and asked, "City Lord, since you are so distressed, and the young sword immortal said that he is willing to sell, then you should buy it. If you are not good at business, who is? Why, for the first time, you can't swallow your pride to earn money. This is not like your usual style." Li Shilang said, "This young man's body is full of pedantic air that assails the nostrils, all rules and regulations, all inflexible rules and regulations, making people feel uncomfortable just by looking at him. Doing business with him is indeed difficult. The Confucian scholar later is much better. The white-haired scholar laughed heartily. Don't talk nonsense. It's obvious that the young sword immortal is too shrewd in doing business. He has some kind of competition with you, causing you to be worried and hurt. If you are not careful, the position of City Lord of Tiemu City might fall into someone else's hands. Otherwise, why would Li Shilang hurriedly throw out an eviction order? How about letting a young junior look down on your magnanimity? Pinching your nose and handing over the mountain pass, and being mocked and ridiculed by others, is this good? Selling literature to earn money, if one did not talk about the amount of money earned, just the style of doing things, this Li Shilang beside him could be said to be unique in the world. Otherwise, he would not have said those shocking words. How can I endure it when I farm and the other eats? I vow to fight to the death. Li Shilang laughed angrily. From your tone, you really want to change the City Lord of Tiemu City? The white-haired scholar said, I just want to give up my position and not be the deputy city lord anymore. Learn from Zhongsan, and leave. In the unseen world, the two city lords of Tiemu City, and perhaps Scholar Du and the others, all thought that the bearded man already knew that when he left the city, it would be the time when the last bit of spiritual light dissipated. The bearded man carried a long sword, rode a lame donkey, drank wine, and left, silently bidding farewell to the world. His heroic spirit made people envious, but there was no pity. However, on the ferry, more people were still thinking of ways to struggle at death's door and muddle through. For example, Li Shilang never hid his joy on the ferry. Therefore, Li Shilang did not speak at the moment. This old friend was different from him. The old friend beside him only used wine and women to avoid etiquette in his heart. Moreover, as the deputy city lord, there were more restrictions than the bearded man who set up a stall, and it was more difficult to leave the city. There were countless books in Tiemu City. Astronomy, geography, the 3 religions and 9 schools, and 100 schools of thought. Human relations, military politics, alchemists, magic, and regulations. Ghosts and monsters, rare treasures, plants and flowers. From the beginning, there were only 4,000 entries on the night boat, and now there were more than 4 million entries. Li Shilang suddenly said, if you really don't want to be the deputy city lord, the young woman beside him may be an opportunity, maybe your only chance. The white-haired old scholar shook his head and said with a smile, the taboo of the wine table is to persuade people to drink. Wouldn't that spoil the mood? Li Shilang said angrily, this kind of unromantic young man, it would be strange if he could find an immortal companion. No wonder they are separated by the heavens, serves him right. The old scholar said with a smile, the scene in that travel book of mountains and rivers is not an ordinary scene under the moon. Li Shilang said, it would be good if that was the case. With such a temperamental person in the book, I would give him a mountain certificate for free. Not to mention a pavilion, I would even give him a mustard seed garden. The old scholar said, that mountain certificate from before was not given by Li Shilang for free. He earned it with his own ability. Friendship is friendship, and the truth is the truth. Li Shilang was helpless. He looked at the small pavilion and said with a sigh, what a pity about this pavilion. In Chicken and Dog City, beside a large river, a laurel man was walking slowly. Not far from the shore, there was an academy. There was also a stone tablet on the shore with the words Place of Inquiry inscribed on it. In the middle of the billowing river, there was a large rock that was the heart of the water. Long Bin asked softly, City Lord, when that white-robed monk traveled on the ferry, he only left this thing on the boat, saying that he was waiting for a fated person. Could it be that Chen Pinggan? A sword immortal and a scholar, it doesn't seem to be related. The laurel man said with a smile, I can't say. If I say it, it won't be true. Long Bin glanced at a male retainer who was following them from afar and asked carefully, could it be that you want to ask for a sword? The laurel man said, we'll talk about it later. In the White Eye City, also known as the Useless City, in a rural area, the lord who left the useless city rode on an ox with a long sword hanging from its horn. The old Daoist sang loudly as he held a watermelon in his arms. He said that the green ox Daoist could prolong the life of someone who was about to die. Daoist Master White Deer was already a withered skeleton. In the end, he was hit by a bunch of naughty children in the countryside with mud. He chased after him and beat him up, forcing the shameless thief to leave the watermelon behind. It was noisy and dusty on the road. The old Daoist rode on the ox's back, swaying. He stroked his beard and smiled. There was no other way. He had received the favor of others and was working for them. Suffering a little was nothing. In the White Eye City, there was a scholar standing on a bridge in the middle of the night. There was only one star in the sky like the moon. The scholar sighed slightly. He did not know when someone would be able to help the White Eye City break the useless city. In the inn of the useless city, the three of them sat at a table. Pei Qian was copying books while Xiaomi was eating melon seeds with the good person mountain lord. Chen Pingan tapped the table lightly with 2 fingers and suddenly said, "That Qin something girl from before, Pei Qian finished writing a sentence and stopped writing. He looked up and blinked. "I don't know her name. Maybe I've never seen her before. Anyway, I can't remember." Chen Pingan nodded. Xiaomi said, "She's called Jasper." "I know. And those 2 books. I remember them." "Wait, let me think. Don't be impatient." Xiaomi stopped eating melon seeds. She crossed her arms and frowned. She started to think seriously about the titles of the 2 books. Chen Pingan threw a glance at Pei Qian. Pei Qian immediately smiled at Xiaomi. "Why are you thinking about this? It's not like that." Xiaomi was at a loss. Pei Qian raised his pen and made a gesture. Xiaomi looked at Pei Qian and then at the good person mountain lord. She sighed. All right. I can't remember." Pei Qian continued to copy books while Xiaomi continued to eat melon seeds. Only Chen Pingan walked to the window and looked at the night sky with his back facing them. No one knew what he was thinking. Xiaomi was about to say something when Pei Qian raised his head and continued to copy books. However, his eyes signaled Xiaomi not to speak. Xiaomi could only continue eating melon seeds. The 12 cities on the night boat. How could it be compared to the Ascension City? Chen Pingan suddenly raised his head and muttered, "Am I dreaming?" The vast world was split open by a sword. Someone wielded a sword and ascended to this place. The Ascension Realm Sword Cultivator followed the guidance of the sword tip. The lady's aura was like a rainbow. She rode her sword straight to the vast ocean between the North Continent and the Aquarius Continent. Then, she casually cut open the restriction. In an instant, she landed at the boundary of the White Eye City. Even the city lords of the 12 cities on the night boat sensed this shocking phenomenon. However, without exception, no one took the initiative to provoke the aggressive lady. The green ox Daoist was the most pitiful because he was the closest to the Lady Sword Immortal. The skinny and short old Daoist was stunned. He looked at the young lady in front of him. Ascension Realm Sword Immortal? The old Daoist forced a smile and pretended to be calm. He asked, "Who are you?" The lady reached out and grabbed the sword that was hanging on the Oxhorn Mountain. She squinted her eyes and asked the lord, "Where's Chen Pingan?" 773. It turned out that she was looking for that brat who was good at doing business. It was a waste of talent if he didn't become a disciple of a merchant. The ox Daoist heaved a sigh of relief. It was just stealing a watermelon, there was no need to be struck by lightning. The old Daoist threw away the watermelon in his hand like a dog gnawing at a watermelon. His expression changed from calmness to realization, and then to joy. It was natural and smooth, without any pretense. "Miss, are you talking about that fellow Daoist Chen? He's a close friend of mine. Despite the difference in age, our friendship is solid. Although we met by chance, we're very close. Otherwise, fellow Daoist Chen wouldn't have handed this sword to me for safekeeping and traveled to this useless city together to open up a path for him. On this small path in this White Eye City village, the Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator who cut open the night boat's restriction was carrying a sword case with 2 swords in it. A woman was traveling at night with a long sword in her hand. She was Ning Yarrow who ascended from the 5th world to Howren. First, she broke through the realm and killed an ancient deity with her sword, accumulating a lot of merit. Then, she opened the sky with her sword and ascended to Howran. Following the clue of one of the 4 immortal swords, tie by sword point, she finally found this strange ferry. However, she didn't expect to not see that guy, but an old daoist riding an ox with a sword hanging on his horn. Subconsciously, Ning Yarrow thought that he was trapped on the ferry. However, she thought about it again. Even the Great Wall of Sword Aura and the savage world couldn't trap him. How could he be detained by a pretentious ferry? Why couldn't that guy be like a fish in water? However, she was still worried because she didn't see him with her own eyes. Ning Yarrow frowned. This is the useless city. Then where is he? If that guy was traveling on this ferry, who did he meet? What kind of tricky situation did he have to hand over his sword to someone else? Or did he return to his old business, being a burden dealer while scheming against someone? In the Ascendant Realm's Quan mansion, they were only missing a portrait of their ancestor. The old daoist's expression changed again. Without any hesitation, he said righteously, "You little girl, I don't care who you are, what background you have, what backing you have. Why, do you want to seek revenge against Daoist Chen and ask for a sword fight? Then don't blame me for relying on my age to help fellow Daoist Chen take on this matter." He didn't mention anything about Sword Immortal or Ascendant Realm. He could only assume that his eyesight was lacking and that he couldn't tell at all. Ning Yarrow smiled and asked, "Senior, are you sure you can handle this?" That fellow had clearly returned to the vast heavens. If he was still in his hometown in the Aquarius continent, it would have been fine. But now, it seemed that he had gone to the North continent. Why was he so free? The old daoist's expression changed again. He didn't need to judge the situation and changed the topic again. He sighed with emotion and said, "I'm an outsider after all, so it's not good for me to get involved in the affairs of you young people. Allow me to take advantage of my seniority and give you a piece of advice. If you really have some misunderstanding with my little fellow Daoist Chen, it will be fine as long as both sides talk it out. Don't let a good marriage in this world be delayed by not talking about it." Ning Yarrow smiled. Sure enough, he was a kindred spirit of that fellow. The old Daoist priest's eyes were shrewd and ruthless. He immediately felt relieved. As expected, they were the Daoist companions of the young couple on the mountain. Little fellow Daoist Chen is lucky. On the ferry, these cultivators who were able to open up a different world, the so-called ascension and leaving as one's heart, could be real or fake. In the end, it was still a matter of borrowing. Moreover, if there was borrowing, there would be repayment. Both parties were willing. The rules were strict, and business was fair. However, they were most afraid of using a sword to break 10,000 laws, especially sword cultivators who could break the restrictions of heaven and earth. Previously, the female immortal, Tsung Mi, almost fell into a trap on the ferry. If she didn't have an immortal realm sword cultivator by her side to protect her, who used his sword to open a path and forcefully left, Tsung Mi would have most likely capsized in a ditch. Generally speaking, immortal realm sword cultivators could come and go freely on the nighttime ferry. However, if they wanted to behave atrociously on the ferry, they still couldn't do it. This was because there was still an immortal realm sword cultivator on the ferry. His ending wasn't good. Now, he was still working as a waiter in Bento City. Fortunately, the sword cultivator's heart wasn't ordinary. After living under someone else's roof for more than 1,000 years, he didn't lose his mind. Moreover, this ferry indeed didn't welcome the most simple-minded sword cultivator in the world. In addition to his abundant sword chi and fierce swordsmanship, which made people afraid, his knowledge was often shallow, which was of little benefit to the ferry. He might even be inferior to a cultivator of the lower 5 realms from the 100 schools of thought. Little fellow Daoist Chen is now in Medusa City. The old Daoist stroked his beard and said with a smile, "It's just that this little girl, I'm not bluffing. With your swordsmanship, it's not difficult to board and disembark. However, it's really not easy to go through the doors between the many cities on the ferry. It's extremely difficult. You're like facing an immortal realm array master. You can only fall into a situation where you're in a disadvantageous position. Instead of opening a path with a sword and bumping around everywhere, It's better to let little fellow Daoist Chen take the initiative to find you. As long as that kid came to White Eye City, it was equivalent to him taking back the long sword. This transaction would be considered even. What's more, this female immortal realm cultivator in front of him looked travel-worn and somewhat difficult to hide her tiredness from the previous journey. It was just that her pair of eyes still made people not dare to look directly at her. She was indeed the most difficult sword cultivator on the mountain. Her aura was sharp. On the contrary, little fellow Daoist Chen was pleasant when talking to others. When looking at others, his eyes were gentle, as if he was the opposite of this female sword cultivator. Probably because of this immortal realm sword cultivator's contrast, the old Daoist felt more and more that getting along with little fellow Daoist Chen was like a spring breeze. They had just parted, but it made people miss him very much. Ning Yarrow looked around. I'll wait for him here. If he didn't come in half an hour, she would go to find him. It was not that she didn't have the confidence to find him. It was just that she didn't feel tired after crossing countless mountains and rivers between two worlds. However, when she was really close to him, Ning Yarrow wanted to stop instead. It was just that the first sentence after meeting him, what should she say? Ning Yarrow frowned unconsciously. The old Daoist, who didn't know whether to leave or not, rode on the back of the ox. He seemed calm and composed, but in fact, he was very flustered. Especially when this woman frowned, he was even more uneasy. The old Daoist glanced at the blooming watermelon on the ground and felt a little regretful. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have thrown it away. At this moment, he could have eaten it to relieve his boredom. It wasn't that Daoist green ox was cowardly. Thinking back to the past, in the vast world, this lord who loved to wander the world and play with the world was also an expert who had accomplished many magnificent feats and immortals. Interacting with an ascendant realm sword cultivator really made one's scalp go numb. How many sword cultivators in the world really had a good temper? One by one, after learning a little swordsmanship, they were either slashing people with their swords or walking on the path of slashing people with their swords. For example, wasn't Pei Minute the same in the past? Otherwise, why would he flee to this night boat just to avoid the sharp edge? None of these sword cultivators with high swordsmanship were easy to talk to. Entry City, in the inn. Chen Pingan smiled at Pei Qian and said, "That mountain certificate, I'll lend it to master first." Pei Qian handed over the immortal certificate made of green paper and said, "Master, just go and pick up mistress. I will protect Xiaomi." Chen Pingan nodded with a smile. He put away the mountain certificate and put it in his sleeve. With one hand on the windowsill, he turned over and left the house. Then, he rose from the ground and went straight to the sky. Looking down, Chen Pingan had a panoramic view of the land of Entry City. Sure enough, it was not as simple as a city, but mountains and rivers that stretched as far as the eye could see. The scenery was magnificent. As his figure rose, the world under his feet was like a chessboard. At some places where the vertical and horizontal lines intersected, there were cities where people gathered or towering mountains stood like chess pieces on the chessboard. When Chen Pingan just rode the wind, the patrolling cavalry general of Entry City threw out the big halberd in his hand. It was as fast as thunder, as if a sword immortal had summoned a flying sword. The long halberd turned into a bright rainbow light, cutting through the sky. The sound of thunder was loud, and it went straight to the foreigner who dared to violate the rules. Chen Pingan slightly changed the trajectory of his flight. With a tap of his toes, he stepped on the tip of the big halberd. Then, his body suddenly leaned back and shrank the mountains and rivers. He was dozens of miles away. He put two fingers together and silently chanted the word slash, and slashed down. It was as if a secret barrier of mountains and rivers had encountered the world's most effective barrier-breaking talisman, and the latter had forcibly opened a door in this small world. The sword cultivators of the world broke all laws with their swords. Chen Pingan stepped forward and waved his sleeve at the same time, knocking the long halberd that followed him back to the mortal world. His figure disappeared at the door. Chen Pingan didn't care as he followed the light that the long sword left on the ferry at night. He just went straight in a straight line. After Chen Pingan flipped out of the house, Xiaomi quickly jumped off the stool and ran to the window. She seemed to have realized that she was too short, so she had no choice but to return to the table and move a stool over. Standing on the stool, she stretched her neck and looked with all her might. Pei Qian walked to the window. Xiaomi asked softly, "Is the Hill Master's wife here?" Pei Qian leaned on the windowsill and nodded with a smile. "It must be Master's wife." Xiaomi whispered in Pei Qian's ear, "When I see the Hill Master's wife later, how many kowtows should I kowtow? Is 100 enough?" After Pei Qian returned home from his first trip to the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Pei Qian was still not very tall. He was about the same height as Sister Nuanshu. But every time he talked to Ju Mili about the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Pei Qian would be extremely happy. He would tell her all sorts of strange things, as well as Pei Qian's great achievements in the pugilistic world. He even told her about a little girl called Guozhujiu. She was very tanned, even darker than charcoal. Moreover, she was much shorter than Xiaomi, but she was an extremely skilled bootlicker. When she kowtowed, she would kowtow to Pei Qian every time. However, that little girl nicknamed Lu Duan was a little silly. Her words were even more uncouth than Chenlingjuan's, but she was actually quite a good person. She could be considered Master's disciple. After a while, Xiaomi remembered that little girl who was Pei Qian's junior apprentice sister. She also remembered that little girl's favorite habit of kowtowing. When Pei Qian heard Xiaomi's question, he immediately knew that something was wrong. If Master knew how he had talked about Guozhujiu behind his back when he was young, he would probably be in deep trouble. Those little account books of Master's were never written down. They were only in Master's heart. No one could flip through them or see them. Thus, Pei Qian first told Xiaomi that there was no need to kowtow. When she met Master's wife, she just had to remember to shout Mountain Lord's wife a few times. He also reminded Xiaomi that she did not recognize Guozhujiu. Xiaomi scratched her face and said, "If I shout with all my might, my voice will be very loud. If I'm not careful, it will sound like thunder. What if I scare Mountain Lord's wife?" Pei Qian smiled and rubbed Xiaomi's head. "Master's wife is very powerful. She won't be scared by you." Xiaomi thought for a moment, how powerful? Pei Qian was silent for a moment. He looked at the twilight outside the window and gave an answer that did not seem to answer the question. "Without Master's wife, I wouldn't have met Master." Xiaomi suddenly stretched out her hand and patted Pei Qian's arm lightly. Because for some reason, the black-clothed young lady felt that Pei Qian seemed a little sad at this moment. It was neither too sad nor too sad, just a little. After Pei Qian grew up, she would often be like this. She would accompany her and Sister Nuanshu on Luopa Mountain. No matter if it was on the second floor of the bamboo house, at the stone table by the cliff, or at the railing at the peak of the mountain, as they sat and chatted, Pei Qian would suddenly stop talking. She would think about something and purse her lips. Moreover, she would straighten her back, as if she was looking at a place very, very far away. During those years when they were on the mountain, Pei Qian would occasionally raise her head and look at a very, very high place. However, her mood seemed to be in a very, very low place. Even if Xiaomi wanted to help, she couldn't pick it up and move it. Pei Qian would no longer roll up her sleeves and walk backward step by step along the green bricks on the ground before jumping off the cliff. She would no longer strut around the mountain with him. Pei Qian would no longer jump under a tree, grab onto a branch with both hands, and let him grab her feet to swing with her. There were many branches that Pei Qian would need to jump to grab in the past. Now, Pei Qian could grab onto them by tiptoeing. It had been many years since they had a battle of wits and courage with the hornet's nest on Chiduan Mountain. Many of the interesting things that happened when Pei Qian was short were like melon seeds in her pocket, gone the moment she ate them. Xiaomi gently patted Pei Qian's arm. Pei Qian turned her head, then lowered it slightly and asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" Xiaomi seemed to have picked up a melon seed from Pei Qian's sleeve with 2 fingers and tossed it into her mouth. "It's just a little worry, gone the moment I eat it." Pei Qian laughed, and Xiaomi laughed as well. At first, she was still a little reserved, but when she saw that Pei Qian was happy, Xiaomi immediately grinned from ear to ear. Pei Qian smacked her head and quickly walked to the table. She put away the scroll with the colorful note stuck on it. Xiaomi jumped off the stool and leaned on the table, laughing out loud. "I know. I've never seen it before. How can it be like this? Pei Qian started munching on the melon seeds. Xiaomi leaned on the table and hesitated for a long time. Suddenly, she said softly, Pei Qian, can you cultivate? Pei Qian was puzzled. Why are you asking this? Xiaomi grinned and rested her round chin on the back of her hand. I'm just asking. In fact, she was afraid that the next time she went on a long journey, she would only return home after many years. She was afraid that Pei Qian would not grow taller, but have white hair. Pei Qian smiled. I've always been practicing the sword. It doesn't seem particularly difficult. Pei Qian hurriedly added, you can't say such words to my master, can you? Xiaomi was elated. Do you know? Chen Pinggan left the city where Li Shilang was overseeing and came to an unfamiliar city. Chen Pinggan, who had traveled far, actually fell head first into the river. With a punch, the river was cut off, and the water boiled. Soon after, he entered the third city. There was a towering mountain blocking his way. Chen Pinggan changed his sword technique and learned from Ding Ying and Pei Minute. He used his finger sword technique, and the sword light burst out, splitting the mountain apart. In the next city, Chen Pinggan rode the wind to a bridge in the clouds. On the bridge, there was a slender woman with a beautiful face who looked slightly bitter. When she saw Chen Pinggan, who had crossed the boundary without permission, she became even more displeased. This woman's aura was astonishing. Countless pocket-sized scenes lingered around her like a little bird. There was a jade pendant by the lotus pond, an orchid boat ferry, and a flock of geese heading south. There was a temple with incense burning and a plaque with the words Lotus God Temple. There was a lush grass in front of the door, and the stars in the sky were rotating. There was a ruby brain golden beast in the house with green smoke rising in spirals. The wind rolled up the curtains, and a maidservant stood on tiptoe to look at the bananas and cherries in the courtyard outside the window. She was whispering to a haggard woman. On the muddy road, more than 10 carriages were moving slowly. A woman with a miserable expression lifted the curtains, and she was deeply worried. Beside her stood a young man with his sleeves hanging down. He had a handsome appearance, silver eyes, and antlers on his head. The young man with antlers raised his hand and reached out his sleeve. A thunder technique condensed in his palm. It was as small as a mustard seed, but its power was as great as a heavenly tribulation. Chen Pinggan continued to ride the wind. He raised his hand and condensed the thunder technique in his palm. In the end, the woman gently shook her head. The young man with antlers with a lonely gaze retracted his hand back into his sleeve. Chen Pinggan had just crossed the bridge in the clouds that hung high in the sky when he realized that he had appeared in a palace. In front of him was a huge mirror that was as tall as a person. It could actually reflect one's internal organs. After Chen Pinggan appeared, his sharp sword qi and vigorous gang qi stirred up ripples on the surface of the mirror, causing the liver, gallbladder, and internal organs to be reflected in the mirror. In an instant, there were 2 realm protectors in the main hall. One of them slashed down with a knife, while the other summoned a flying sword. Chen Pinggan walked straight forward. He held the blade with one hand and casually pushed it away. He used 2 fingers to catch the flying sword and gently threw it back. He was dressed in a green robe, and his sleeves swayed as he walked into the mirror. He strolled leisurely and turned his head with a smile. Sorry for the offense. How many mountains and rivers had he traveled to the Great Wall of Sword Qi twice? A night boat was no more than 12 cities. This distance was nothing. Above the sea, a group of 4 people hovered in the wind. The sea beneath their feet was turbulent, and huge waves that were dozens of feet high were stirred up by the sword qi of the female sword deity. In the distant sea, there were 8 winds and thunder, and 5 colored clouds were gathering and dispersing. Not long after they left the night boat, the woman seemed to be right next to them. She slashed out with her sword and cut the restriction, opening the door to the small world of the ferry. Her figure flashed and she entered the ferry. The rules of heaven and earth and the ferry laws were all useless. The dangers on the mountain and the treacherous secret realms were all false. Anyway, she had leveled them with one strike. The yellow-purple noble of the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu was shocked. He patted his chest and did not hide his fear. I have never seen such a domineering woman who exudes the aura of a sword deity in my life. For the 4 cultivators on the mountain, the distance of dozens of miles was just a hair's breadth away from where the sword landed. Yuan Yang said, "If I'm not wrong, it's Ning Yarrow from the Ascension City." The young Daoist had a playful look in his eyes. Did the two of them know each other? Yuan Yang could only explain with a smile. She left the Ascension City this time with a jade token from the Wen Temple. The young Daoist asked tentatively, did Ning Yarrow rely on accumulating merits to return to the vast world like Zhao Yarrow of the Wen Saints lineage? The old sword deity, who had always been taciturn, suddenly said, she's already an Ascension Realm sword deity. The old man had unsheathed his sword and stood in front of the 3 young people to protect them. His main purpose was to protect the young Celestial Master and the young monk from the Celestial Master residence. As for Yuan Yang, the old sword deity did not need to worry too much. The young Daoist was shocked. How old is Ning Yarrow? She should be in her 40s at most. How can she be in the Ascension Realm? It was not strange for Ning Yarrow to become the first Jade Pure Realm cultivator in the history of the 5th world. Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple in the Aquarius continent entered the Jade Pure Realm in his 40s. It was not strange for Ning Yarrow to become the first Immortal Realm cultivator in the brand new world. It could be said that she was well prepared and blessed by the heavens. It was time for her to become the leader of the Sword Dao in the world. However, it would be strange if it was not strange for her to reach the Ascension Realm just like that. The young Daoist shook his head vigorously. He would never believe that Ning Yarrow was already in the Ascension Realm. The old sword deity said, Ning Yarrow's cultivation talent is too good. She has an immortal sword and the luck in the 5th world. It's not too difficult for her to reach the Ascension Realm. It's just that it's unexpected that she broke through so quickly. There were many discussions about whether Ning Yarrow could reach the Ascension Realm and reach the peak of the vast world. They all felt that it was not difficult. The only debate was how long it would take for Ning Yarrow to break through the bottleneck of the Immortal Realm. For example, the old sword deity from the Central Divine Continent guessed that it would take about 80 years, which was not far from the estimation of the abacus plate. Only Fatty Yu, who was the banker and invited everyone to bet, was the most exaggerated, saying that it would take at most 30 years. Well, this time, Yu Panshui really killed him and made a lot of money. The 10 young people of the heavens and the 10 substitutes made a total of 22 people. Ascension City's Ning Yarrow, the Confucian scholar of the quasi-saint lineage, and the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Chen Shi. As well as one of the substitutes, dream tourist of the Liuxia continent, the city lord of Appearance City, whose alias was Xiao Baohuan. If it wasn't for the fact that Yuan Zhen had just left, there would have been 4 people on a night boat. And this Yuan Zhen was the Confucian scholar who won the debate against Li Baoping. The young Daoist turned to look at the old man and said with a smile, "Senior?" The old sword deity knew what this kid wanted to ask and said indifferently, "I can't beat him, but I can barely escape." Sword cultivators of the same realm fought in pairs. The sword cultivators of the vast world were far inferior to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. This was common sense, and they had to admit it even if they didn't want to. Qi Tingji, who had already established a sect in the South Swirl continent, had confirmed this truth. Cutting down a Jade Realm cultivator was really like playing around. Not to mention that Ning Yarrow was now in the Ascension Realm. The young Daoist sighed. Scary, really scary. Such a woman, who can become her Dao companion in the future. This really makes me very curious. The old sword deity smiled for the first time. Since Ning Yarrow isn't going to the wilderness to slay great demons, but is rushing to the ferry, why is she in such a hurry? The young Daoist laughed loudly and said, as expected of an experienced Jianghu veteran. Unique views and sharp eyes. The old sword deity laughed it off. Cultivating in the mountains was a long time. As long as one was an old man who was still single, which old man didn't have a bit of romance? After all, it wasn't the left and right who seemed to have water in his head. If there really was a matchmaker in the world who flipped through the marriage book, Yu Laro would definitely be annoyed by alliance and afraid of the left and right. One of them would cry and beg Yu Laro, wishing that she could wrap her hands and feet with red strings. One of them was Yu Laro. If he dared to get close, he would be asking the left and right. Yuanjin said, "Let's continue on our way." The group rode the wind towards the central divine continent. There were now a total of 6 teams like them in the vast world. As the young Daoist rode the wind, he couldn't help but think of the smiling and good-tempered green-robed guest in Luogong City. Could it be that guy who attracted Ning Yao? That guy's breadth of mind and bearing were naturally excellent, but his appearance seemed to be inferior to his own. Xiao Baohuan had returned from Tiemu City. He went to a famous shop and bought all the books that recorded that story. After that, he immediately used his identity as the city lord of Luogong City and crushed a talisman that was similar to a customs document. He set off for the extremely absurd Benmo City. In the corridor of a palace that was like a paradise, Xiao Baohuan saw 2 beautiful women. One was wearing a palace dress and had a graceful bearing. The other was wearing a loose dress and was charming. The former was the Lady of Kongtong. She was now the leader of the female officials in the West Court of the Water Dragon Hall. She was in charge of drawing eyebrows and holding the lantern. She was also the secretary of the West Court and could be considered half the mistress of the 16th Court of Longlin Canal. At this moment, she was kneeling on a bamboo mat. She turned her head and greeted Xiao Baohuan with a smile. She didn't get up to greet him. The Lady of Kongtong only wore one embroidered shoe all year round. The woman beside her had taken off her shoes and was lying on the bamboo mat. She leaned against a porcelain pillow and was drinking wine. She was naturally charming. She raised her head and finished the cup of wine in her hand. The Lady of Kongtong poured her another cup. This woman's posture was as heroic as a man's. She was slightly drunk and her cheeks were flushed. She looked like a peach blossom maiden. However, she wasn't from Benmo City. Her real name was Ju Su. In Li Shilang's Luogong City, she changed her name to Zhu Shu. When she was alive, she was a famous courtesan in Beihao. She liked to drink wine, but she had a rule. If she didn't meet someone who understood her, she wouldn't touch a drop of wine. Zhu Su was Li Shilang's maid in Tiemu City. As for why she often came here to drink with the Lady of Kongtong, it was probably because she met someone who empathized with her. There were also some erotic rumors that were widely spread in the 2 cities. Xiao Baohuan wasn't in the mood to investigate whether they were true or false. Xiao Baohuan bowed and said with a smile, "Greetings, Lady Wu, Miss Ju." Zhu Su's lapel opened slightly, revealing a faintly discernible snow-white skin. She narrowed her peach blossom eyes and asked with a smile, "City Lord Xiao, could it be that you've already gathered the 3 items?" Xiao Baohuan took out 3 items. A bag of green, a piece of string, and an embroidered shoe that he had prepared beforehand. He took a few steps forward and bent down to place it on the edge of the bamboo mat. Zhu Su suddenly stretched out her foot and stepped on the embroidered shoe. She smiled charmingly. "Oh, you've really gathered them for City Lord Xiao. This isn't an easy thing. Why don't I make a deal with you? The 3 items belong to me, and I'll get Baohuan. As for whether it's a night of spring or a few nights of spring, we can discuss it." Xiao Baohuan said helplessly, "Miss Zhu, you must be joking." Wu Jiangxian sat up with a faint look in her eyes. She put away the conch and the string. Then, she picked up the embroidered shoe and changed her sitting position. She turned sideways, lowered her head, and bent down to put it on her feet. Xiao Baohuan had already retracted his gaze and looked forward, not looking at this charming scene. In fact, Xiao Baohuan was most afraid of coming to absurd Tang City among the 11 cities outside of Appearance City. Because here, the cultivator's realm was the most useful and the least useful. For outsiders like them, according to the rules of this world, they were considered passers-by. Therefore, a Jade Pure Realm cultivator would have a realm of cultivation in this city. A cultivator who had just stepped on the path of cultivation might have the cultivation of an earth immortal here, and even have the Jade Pure Realm spells and supernatural powers. Only cultivators around the Dragon Gate realm would have a cultivation that was roughly equivalent to their real realm in the city. The little cave-dwelling realm water monster in the basket on Chen Pingan's back could, of course, climb a few realms after entering the city. But Chen Pingan's sudden drop in realms was an opportunity for Xiao Baohuan. Therefore, Xiao Baohuan had to make another trip to absurd Tang City to set up an ambush for the hidden official. On Du Shouzai's side, he first gave the white ginger and other items in exchange for the narrow knife and small eyebrows. It was true that he obtained the opportunity, but it was more to get close to Chen Pinggan without leaving a trace. He then added the content of the flower-smoked calligraphy to help the descendant of the Fu family fulfill his wish. In the end, he exchanged a bag of green and a piece of string from the old man. Exchanging a real opportunity with the Lady of Kongtong was a lie, but asking her for something was real. The Lady of Kongtong stood up and asked, "Mayor Xiao, if you have any requests, please state them. As long as it is within my ability, I will not refuse. Even if you want me to ask for the 400 scrolls of Changju Jade Mirror from Yangmen County Duke, or the set of regional universe illustrated records compiled by Queasy Elve and supplemented by Unishi, it is not a problem. I believe that Li Shilang's side in absurd Tang City has been waiting for many years. However, I am unable to move the excerpts of Dongju's Guanwen Palace Hall. I hope that Mayor Xiao will not force me." The West Garden Longlin Canal and Dongju's Guanwen Palace Hall in absurd Tang City had a very rich collection of books, totaling more than 400,000 scrolls. However, the most precious books were never exchanged with Tiemu City. Li Shilang could not do anything about it. Xiao Baohuan glanced at Zhu Su. The Lady of Kongtong turned her head and smiled, "I won't keep you." Zhu Su's eyes were filled with hidden bitterness. She put down the wine cup, covered her collar with one hand and picked up her shoes with the other. She slowly stood up and whispered affectionately, "Wouldn't it be better if you count me in?" The Lady of Kongtong turned a deaf ear. After Zhu Su's figure disappeared, Xiao Baohuan opened his mouth and said, "I am not asking Lady Wu for these precious books. I only have one request. I hope that Lady Wu can at some point open the city's restriction so that someone will not be bound by the great Tao of Benmo City and be able to wield his sword once. It will be enough to wield his sword 3 times against a passerby on the ferry." The Lady of Kongtong frowned slightly. "The person you want to kill is the green-robed sword immortal beside that young woman?" Xiao Baohuan nodded, "That's him." The Lady of Kongtong walked beside the white jade railing. She habitually stretched out a slender finger and gently touched her eyebrows. For a moment, it was difficult to make a choice. The young woman who held the mountain walking staff was actually able to look at her from a distance in absurd Tang City. This already surprised the Lady of Kongtong. As for the person Xiao Baohuan mentioned, it was the immortal realm sword cultivator who was detained by the night boat for 1,000 years. His surname was Wn Kun, and he was a jade craftsman. At this moment, he was still serving tea and water in a wine shop. The style of the xiaoxia money in the vast world had been revised several times. In the end, they chose the casting standard of this jade craftsman. Moreover, among the 3 kinds of immortal money on the mountain, only the xiaoxia money chose seal characters. It was started by Wn Kun, this recognized infatuated type. The reason why this famous jade craftsman who eventually became a sword immortal took the initiative to find the night boat and became an errand boy in Benmo City was, of course, to make the Lady of Kongtong change her mind and continue their previous relationship. While the Lady of Kongtong was hesitating, she and Xiao Baohuan looked up at the sky almost at the same time. The sword light was like a rainbow, shining in all directions. In the end, the female sword immortal landed in the White Eye City. The Lady of Kongtong was in a daze and murmured, "What an outstanding woman." Xiao Baohuan was a little scared. Because he guessed the identity of the female sword immortal. Ning Yaro, the leader of the 100 sword immortals of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, was now the number 1 person on the peak of the 5th world. The night boat itself was a wonderful immortal weapon. The cultivation base of the person overseeing the ferry was equivalent to an ascendant realm. The female immortal of Liuxia continent, Tsongo, and the sword immortal who found the ferry with her did not land on the boat with a sword. Like Chen Pinggan, they first took the ferry and then docked on the night boat. However, Tsongo saw that the situation was not good. The sword immortal beside her had to open up a path with a sword. The night boat did not deliberately obstruct them. Xiao Baohuan, as one of the 12 city lords, did not dare to say that he had seen the depth of the ferry under his feet. Xiao Baojuan's figure suddenly flashed, and he left Bento City involuntarily. The lady of Kongtong immediately bowed, as a salute to someone from afar. The will of heaven was unpredictable. In Chicken and Dog City, on the bank of the river that Chen Pinggan had passed by, the man Laurel brought Long Bin with him to the barrier's city gate. The city lord of Chicken and Dog City, with a slight thought, spread out a snow-white scroll like paper on the surface of the water. 70 to 80 seal sloughs of different sizes appeared one by one, with red and white seal scripts. The first seal slough was the Wine Immortal Poetry Buddha, the sword is eternal. It was used by the city lord of Chicken and Dog City, one of the upper 4 cities, to take the opportunity to tease city lord Huang of White Eye City. Didn't the latter say that the immortals and Buddhas were vast and boundless? The man's waist hung an ancient jade with the seal script of Fueling Marquis. This was self-deprecating. The young man beside the city lord could not help but grin and laugh. This Mr. Chen is both elegant and vulgar. He can open a shop in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, sell wine to make money, and have the mind to carve so many seals. No foreign sword cultivator can do such a thing. The man Laurel laughed. I heard that after the 100 Sword Immortal Seal Manual, there is also the Phantom Sword Immortal Seal Manual. Now, not even 100 seals have been collected. There is still a long way to go. Long Bin said, if we can get 2 seals directly, we won't have to be so troublesome. The man shook his head and asked, looking at these seals, do you find any knowledge? Long Bin glanced at the seals on the river and said, in the Golden Stone Seal Manual, there are dozens of types of characters. But this Chen Pinggan only uses a few seal scripts, adhering to the rules and regulations everywhere. No wonder Li Shilang thinks he is pedantic. And even the relatively rare folded seal script and birdbug script are rarely used. Is he worried that the sword cultivators of the Great Wall of Sword Chi will not recognize them? Can't he sell the seals? And even the side of the seals are not written in cursive. It's as if he has never learned and does not know how to write at all. The man laughed. There are only 3 folded seal scripts. Beautiful idea prolongs life, worried heart, and half-knowing ghost hits the wall. These are all meant to borrow the meaning of the words. They purposely took the complexity of the words to match the seals. Other than that, all the seals are easy to recognize. Why? Of course, it is because of this young hidden official's state of mind. He is pursuing a realm of knowledge that is just and right. He can stand firm anywhere. There is no threshold, so there is no need to pay attention to things like when in Rome do as the Romans do. It is like saying something casually to people. People on the mountain will understand it, scholars will understand it, and people who have never studied will understand it. Long Bin bowed and praised, the city lord is wise. The man continued, but the reason why I value the Ying Sword Fairy Manual so much is not only because of the contents of the seals, but also because there is a hidden tug-of-war. It is too interesting. The man lifted his sleeves and made a gesture of writing with both hands. He poked lightly and smiled. Scholars are unable to study, and write books. Even the children in the village know how to write. What's so strange about that? However, this Chen Pinggan's handwriting resembled a person. It was already very similar, but he still had to work so hard for nothing. From beginning to end, he was chasing after another person. Therefore, it was extremely interesting. I can even imagine a young man in a shabby alley practicing calligraphy. The further he goes, the more competitive he will be, as if his eyes are about to kill someone. The young man looked at the shedding water scroll on the water and said in surprise, there are so many ways. The laurel man put his hands behind his back and suddenly smiled. He said to himself, what an interesting person. There are the most number of single seals. There is the room of yearning. The heart is attached to the beauty, thinking of her. The regret of not being able to travel far, the sword hangs a long rainbow. Clear and bright. The young man dreams, and the wind and rain. A lifetime of bowing to the sword immortal. Behind the north, beautiful eyes look forward. The deer cry, the oriole flies, reluctant to part. The sword aura here is the longest in the world. The temple, the Taoist temple, the Taoist temple. The flowers and the moon are united, the immortal couple. The beauty of a woman in the world shames the 3 lanterns in the sky. There are no mountains or rivers, but it is the highest city in the world. The children are playing, the sword immortal is drinking. There are 300 oranges in the frost. I am not moved by the wind, the banner is not moved, the heart is not moved. The golden wind and dew, the spring grass and green hills, the 2 are compatible. The white egret stands in the snow during the day, the inkstone has no light at night. Who is at the top of the city? There are the most clouds in the world. The wild goose hits the wall. The fish turns into a dragon. Ask to be drunk, don't be drunk. The flowers and grass are lush. Climbing the city is like visiting a tomb, the sword is like offering wine. Resting in the big dragon cave of Yangdang Mountain, in the dream of the 3rd watch, the sky is full of stars, unable to sleep, barefoot jumping into the grass. The reincarnation of the Dingguang Buddha, the mortal of the Soha world. Hot pot and wine, I have the world. Winter bamboo shoots fried with meat. The wanderer, the person in the painting, the sweetheart. The fox talks nonsense. The books are not expensive, but they are hard to buy. The narrow path, everyone is wild. I will let you have one move. It is just a heavenly tribulation. The meaning is clear. It is just walking with an umbrella. Repenting is better than not doing wrong. Not knowing enough. I don't dare to climb the city with a sword, for fear of driving back the 3 moons. Why should I learn the sword? The sword supports the moon mountain. Which street does not have sword immortals? Those without flying swords are also sword cultivators. The great wall of sword energy can be arrogant. There were also pairs of imprint molts. You. Me. Inseparable. 2 hearts are connected. Bowing to the sky. The Tao illuminates the world. Generosity goes. Boundless returns. Pour a cup of wine for you. The sun and moon are in the middle of the cup. Past and present. They are all sword cultivators. Sword immortals were once young. Sword immortals were once young girls. The wine sold by the 2nd shopkeeper is excellent. Drink if you don't believe it. It is indeed delicious. There are even imprints with marginal content. Marginal content, the road is muddy, the people are exhausted, heroes are not recorded in the books. The real famous person is not romantic, the big stone is upright in the sky. Imprint, so you are a gentleman. 1,000 credits are not as good as $800. Sincerity is hard to beat evil. Imprint, earning money is not easy, cultivation is very difficult. There are no accidents in the world, fighting for fame and profit is endless. Let me roll my eyes at you. Imprint, let's drink. Since ancient times, poets can't wait to kill the word love. Only I hate that love does not come and drink his mother's wine. Anger comes from the guts, smashing the book with a stick, smashing the graceful poem. Imprint, I am a lonely man. Without money, sword immortals have no wine to get drunk. The graceful beauty suddenly has autumn fat. Imprint, what should I do? The old friend is even more beautiful, generous, and strange. The young man has a peak in his heart, suddenly stolen by the cloud. Imprint, careless. Hanging Arch City. Outside the main hall where the ancient mirror was placed, there was a lazy man sitting on the steps. His sword was across his knees, his body was leaning back, and his elbows were on the ground. Languid, he was looking into the distance. Under his feet was a white snake as thick as the mouth of a bowl. The white snake twisted its body and spoke human language, cursing, "Come and chop me, you bastard. You are so shameless. With your swordsmanship, how dare you draw your sword and chop me? You can chop me to death. Why don't you let people write in the books that you killed all the flood dragons?" The man raised his hand and picked his nose. He nodded and said, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." Only then did the white snake calm down. It swayed its tail gently and said, "These old and young are so annoying. It has been so many years, and they still haven't stopped. Just the old street, they can't afford white cranes, so they want to steal their neighbors' white geese every day. Why don't they do something about it? And that rake here, he squats at the door and watches Miss Lou every day. Every time his wife sees him, she rushes out with a kitchen knife, wanting to chop off the arms and legs of the women passing by. Is this reasonable? That guy called Quan Zhong, if he doesn't gather people to gamble, he spends money to buy people's hearts, forming cliques, and fighting with those old enemies in the nearby streets. He really has nothing better to do. He fights all day long. If you want to F***king fight, you should at least get a few weapons that can chop blood out. What's with the carrying poles and benches? Before the fight, you have to arrange the troops, and after the fight, you have to reward them according to their contributions and give them drumsticks. Are you messing with me? Ah! The more the white snake talked, the angrier it got. It opened its mouth and bit the lazy man's calf. The man felt a burst of pain. He pulled for a long time, but couldn't pull it off. Damn it, you haven't bathed for a few days. What's that smell? The white snake finally loosened its mouth and even spat on the ground. I don't even care to talk about those fellows in Wooey Alley. And that Li guy, he has no grudges with your family's descendants for no reason. Both sides have been separated for so many years, and they have nothing to do with each other. He gave up on making money as a bodyguard and chose not to take the righteous path. He just had to find a way to arrange a battle. Two groups of paupers, together with those 30 or so horses, charged through the enemy's formation. Who are they trying to show off to? Are they crazy? Damn it, there are also some old bachelors and lechers. Look at how poor they are. Every day, they can drink a bowl of wine for half a day. They still have to spit on the side of the road and brag. They are competing to see who has slept with the most women. Besides, that guy named Ordinary, do you think he has a problem in his head? He only eats one meal a day, and then when he has nothing to do, he runs a few streets away to block people's doors. He insists that the guy he forced to commit suicide by swallowing gold return his gold to him. The man endured the white snake's incessant chatter and listened for a full 15 minutes. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He yawned, sat up, and said helplessly, "What else can I do if I don't make a ruckus like this? I have to find something to do." Each and every one of them, regardless of whether they were wise or incapable emperors, whether they were the founding emperors or the fallen emperors, were all people whose names would go down in history. In fact, the Hanging Arch City was mostly a quarrel between the emperor and his subjects. It was estimated that as long as the night ships were still there, the two sides would continue to quarrel. As for the fathers scolding their sons behind closed doors, and the ancestors scolding their unfilial descendants, there was no need to talk about it. Every family had its own difficulties to recite. The white snake raised its head and said angrily, "You have no eyesight at all. Hurry up and give me a pot of wine to drink. If you don't have good wine, cut your own thigh with a sword and let me deal with it." The man laughed, "When that immortal couple comes to our place as guests, I'll help you ask them for a few pots of genuine immortal wine." The white snake was silent, then muttered in a low voice, "You can't drink decapitation wine. When the time comes, don't just call him brother and treat him to some snake stew. The water is the rippling of the eyes, the mountain is the gathering of the eyebrows. If you want to ask where to go to the eyebrows and eyes." The man took a deep breath and pressed his hands on the scabbard. He laughed. Being young and still alive really makes one envious. The white snake coiled up and asked, "You ignorant and incompetent person, when did you learn to talk about literature?" The man stretched and said, "Should we go see if there are any new nursery rhymes or go stroll around the pavilion of eternal peace?" The white snake sneered, "If you have the ability, go to the pavilion of Wu River." The man raised his sword and stood up, "If you have the guts, then you don't have the ability." He played with his sword and accidentally dropped it on the ground. The white snake swung its tail and swept the sword dozens of feet away. It remembered something and reminded, "Ji Sijuan, that debt collector, is asking you for the reward for the Lawside chapter again. He's complaining to your auntie that he really can't eat these days. It can't be helped. It's not that he's spouting nonsense. Every now and then, he'll treat a Sima to good wine. When he's drunk, he'll get a Sima to drink his fill. After all, the money for the wine and medicine are all real expenses. You can't blame the old man for coming here to complain about being poor." However, the old man deliberately wore that pair of worn-out boots that are about to wear through the soles. "It's a little too much." The white snake suddenly said angrily, Why are you staring at me with your eyes wide open? How much money can you get by selling me? You're crazy. The man retracted his gaze and walked down the stairs step by step. He asked, that woman, is she really in the ascendant realm? The white snake slid down the stairs and said, she has to be. And I don't know why, seeing that woman and seeing that young sword immortal just now, I feel like my eyelids are twitching, my legs are unstable, and my heart is trembling. The man bent down to pick up the sword and put it on his shoulder. He looked down. I didn't hear you clearly, can you say that again? The white snake flew into a rage out of humiliation and was about to bite the man's calf, treating it as a drink. In the end, the man kicked it up high and used the scabbard to slap it away. The man hugged the sword and stood with a satisfied face. He nodded and said, this is very kingly. The man quickly became worried. He thought about his auntie and then thought about the young sword immortal's immortal companion. Comparisons were odious. But no matter what, he still liked her. The lazy man who walked slowly with his sword tapped on his shoulder felt that when he was 35 years old, she was only 20 years old. She was very beautiful at that time. Xiao Baohuan came to a mountain peak that did not belong to the 12 fairy cities. It was surrounded by clouds and mist. On the top of the mountain, there was only a middle-aged scholar with a thin appearance and a monk who was sleeping soundly on a futon. Around this lonely mountain, there was a vast sea of clouds. Cities could be vaguely seen, like duckweed that was undulating with the water. Suddenly, the scenery changed. It was as if he was in the outer space. The stars were as small as mustard seeds, but they were all in the panoramic view, as bright as the Milky Way. In the blink of an eye, the scenery changed again. It was as if pedestrians were walking on the ancient road like tall gods, and the lonely mountain was just a speck of dust on the road. Xiao Baohuan bowed to the scholar first, and then smiled bitterly. Ship owner, why do you want me to target Chen Pingan like this? If he did not agree to this, not only would he not be able to keep his position as the city lord of Appearance City, but he would also not be able to leave the dreamland. Although it was only a piece of divine sense, it would sink into the world of the fairy. But for Xiao Baohuan, who was a traveler in the dreamland, as one of the 10 young candidates of several worlds, his ambition was to reach the peak of the Great Tao. This involved the entire future of the Great Tao, which was equivalent to his life. As long as a piece of his mind could not escape, when he broke through the bottleneck of nascent soul, he would not be disturbed by any inner demons. The next barrier on the Great Tao, in Buddhist words, was as big as Mount Meru, lying across the road. As for Xiao Baohuan, he had studied the Buddhist school, the least of the various schools of thought. Otherwise, he would not have missed out on the opportunities of the Buddhist sect so many times and still not been able to obtain them. The middle-aged scholar asked, guess, after he entered the city, including you, how many words did he say to the locals of the ferry? Xiao Baohuan shook his head and smiled bitterly. How could he guess? The middle-aged scholar slowly walked to the edge of the mountain peak. He is a foreigner, and you are half a foreigner, so it is just right. Others are not suitable for this. Whether or not Xiao Baohuan's 3 schemes succeeded or not was not important at all. The ferry did not expect that the city lord Xiao, who was one of the 10 young candidates, would be able to keep the hidden official, Chen Shi. It was not only the gap between the two sides, but also their temperament. What the middle-aged scholar needed was to use Xiao Baohuan's appearance in the city to pester him endlessly. He wanted the young hidden official to chat with people on the night boat, visit immortals, and fish for opportunities. The more, the better. The more Chen Pingan spoke on the night boat, the more words he involved, the more weight he had on the ferry. Every word was a nail, every sentence was a chain, and every opportunity was a small cage of thorns. In the end, when the young man thought about it, his heart would feel like it was being cut by a knife. This was the hospitality of the ferry. Ordinary people did not receive such treatment, and even immortals were not worthy. Therefore, there was a reason for making an exception to let Chen Pingan and the other 2 directly enter the city. The middle-aged scholar looked at the village path of the White Eye City and smiled. Man proposes, God disposes. This is a bit troublesome. He smiled at Xiao Baohuan. You have already found a way out, what are you afraid of? Long Bin of the Chicken and Dog City kept calling him Mr. Chen and helped Marquis Fueling to ask for the seal slough, so you deliberately took the risk to expose Chen Ping'an's identity as a hidden official. It is actually very wise, and it can dispel the other party's last hope. Besides, in the end, if you are really forced to confront him, you can pour all the dirty water on me. Here, take it as a promise, so there is no need to feel burdened. Xiao Baohuan was silent. The owner of the ferry, Mr. Zhong, had the cultivation of the ascendant realm. This ferry was an immortal supreme treasure that ceaselessly rose in quality by relying on sewing and mending. Presently, it was already an immortal artifact. Moreover, on the night boat, the newest 4 cities would be opened in the near future. This was also one of the reasons why Xiao Baohuan had been so tirelessly running around recently. Moreover, Xiao Baohuan's biggest reliance was not the identity of the city lord of Beauty City. It was that every time he slept and woke up, he could leave his real body in the place of cultivation in the Liuxia continent, sleepwalk on the night boat, and change a certain mind time and time again. By repeatedly entering the dream, he added knowledge to the various cities on the ferry. Through this shortcut, he accumulated enough merit at an extremely fast speed to win the position of the City Lord of Beauty City, one of the lower 4 cities. It was just that Xiao Baohuan was still unable to determine whether Mr. Zhong was alive or dead, his true realm, his foundation of Tao, and his trump card. Everything was too illusory and too mysterious. On a night boat, there was an old saying that there was a house of gold in a book, 1,000 grains of rice, and a jade-like beauty. Moreover, everyone's knowledge could be used to exchange for money, which could allow the living immortals to extend their lives, piece together their souls, and refine the real into the illusory, so that a little bit of spiritual light would not dissipate. The middle-aged scholar looked at the distant sea of clouds. Xiao Baohuan followed his gaze and found that it was the heaviest of the 12 cities on the night boat, Goosefeather City, also known as Question and Answer City. And this so-called heaviness was the kind of weight that could be bought for a price. The 12 cities on the ferry had always been divided into different sizes and weights. Even though Xiao Baohuan was the city lord, he could not enter Goosefeather City. He only had some scattered rumors. It was completely different from the city that strictly adhered to the principles of seeking the truth in all matters, and Ning Q does not write. Goosefeather City, as its name suggested, recorded countless trivial matters, both big and small. But because they were all old records outside the ferry, immortals would not be able to overturn them, so they were as light as a feather and insignificant. The files in the city were piled up like mountains. They recorded everything up and down the mountain, the court, the officialdom, the streets of Jianghu, and countless things. Some things had both a cause and an effect, but Goosefeather City never cared whether the effect was true or false. They never deliberately sought the truth. For example, an official document from the Yamen, a verdict from the local ancestral hall, or a fair statement from a famous Jianghu figure to settle a dispute would all be recorded. And some things, no matter how big or small, had no effect in the world, so only the word no effect was written at the end of the entry because it had no effect. The middle-aged scholar said, "Go about your business." Xiao Baohuan respectfully bowed and bade farewell to the ship owner. The monk sitting on the futon finally opened his eyes. The middle-aged scholar smiled and said, "Do you think Chen Ping'an has noticed?" The monk began to nap again. The middle-aged scholar interlocked his fingers and tapped his thumbs lightly. He said slowly, "North Continent, the assassin of Deer Mountain, escaped with his left hand." The memory is still fresh. The warning of the first disciple, the mountain river prison, the reflection of the words, the clear name of the night boat, the Karma line, the Daoist network of East Sea Temple. On the path of growth, I began to believe that every knowledge and every principle had power, but at the same time, it was a burden. It does seem a little troublesome. Is a young man so hard to deal with? Every dynasty had its own rules and regulations, every place had its own customs, and every person had their own way of living. He thought of a few things from the past. Among the important guests in the history of the ferry, there was Lu Chen, who had not yet ascended to the Qingming world, and the boatman called Jiyu Qingsong who was by Lu Chen's side. There was also Haoran Jiusheng, who later became Wen Haiju, who was invited to board the night boat on the way to inverted Hanging Mountain. There was also embroidered Tiger Kui Dong, who returned from the Central Plains to his hometown, Aquarius Continent, and later Dali Imperial tutor. The middle-aged scholar could not help but laugh. One is the first disciple of the Wen lineage, the other is the last disciple. Embroidered Tiger opened the door and you closed the door? Are you really so powerful? In the night, Daoist Green Ox sensed something strange and immediately flipped off the ox's back. The old Daoist picked up a watermelon and squatted by the side of the road, his back facing the Ascendant Realm woman who seemed to be uneasy. The old Daoist took a deep breath and shouted softly. His chi sank into his dantian, and he split the watermelon with his palm. He placed half of it by his feet, and then lowered his head to eat the other half. Soon, a green robe staggered out and appeared beside Ning Yao. It was a small country road, and the ground was filled with moonlight. Chen Pingan appeared on the road. Ning Yao had been waiting at the same place, and finally, this guy appeared. He looked at her, and she looked at him. Once, at the entrance of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, after they met after a long separation, he said, "Great World Chen Pingan, came to see Ning Yao." They met again. But this time, both of them were in a foreign land. Their earliest hometown, the small town, was still there, but the Pearl Grotto heaven was gone. The two city walls were still there, and the Great Wall of Sword Chi was gone. But she was still her, and Ning Yao would always be that Ning Yao. Chen Pingan smiled brightly, but his face gradually wrinkled, and he pursed his lips. Then his eyes lit up, and he curled his lips, holding back his laughter. His eyes were gentle. He said nothing, but it seemed like he had said everything. "Ning Yao, I've missed you for so many years. It's been tough, but it's nothing. Meeting you today is the best." She was in high spirits, and she lifted her head slightly, her eyebrows flying. She said to the guy, "Ning Yao of Ascension City is here to see Chen Pingan." 774. The old Daoist who was squatting by the side of the road had just finished eating half of the watermelon in his hand. It was half-cooked and tasted average. He was about to pick up the other half when he heard the names. One of them bent down and the other stretched out his arm. The back of his hand touched the ground and held the watermelon in his palm. He looked like an immortal holding a mountain. The old Daoist stroked his beard and smiled. The watermelon was neither ripe nor sweet. His Daoist spells were not bad at all. However, the two names had nothing to do with little Daoist Chen, whom he was close to. They were from Ascension City and Ning Yao. The old Daoist had seen too many sword immortals. However, the number one person in the entire world was much more important than the watermelon in Daoist Green Ox's hand. What was Brother Sun from Da Xiandu Temple's ranking in the world? 5th place. Talisman Yu Xian. Our brother Yu's sleeves were filled with talisman. What was his ranking in Howren? It seemed that no one knew what his ranking was. In any case, his ranking was still very low. If Ning Yao was only at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, it would be fine. The so-called Great Tao was just a matter of the future. However, Ning Yao was already in Ascension City. Ning Yao was already in the Ascension Realm. It was a matter of fact. Since she had successfully ascended to the Ascension Realm in the Fifth World, it meant that in the future, as long as Ning Yao did not go to the Confucian Temple or ask the sword in the Beko Keikyung building, nothing would happen to her. Therefore, Ning Yao was now traveling far away with her sword. She was leaving her hometown with the great Tao of the world. What was a dragon crossing the river? This was it. The old Daoist could not help but turn his head. He did not care if he would hold a grudge against little Daoist Chen. He still could not help but glance at the girl who was traveling far away with a sword case on her back. It was worth it to look at her. What was the meaning of being experienced in Jianghu? It meant that one had met someone in life, drank with someone, called someone friends, sparred with someone, and exchanged Daoist spells. The heavens were vast and the earth was vast. If a cultivator had won against someone, it might not be a big deal. But if he had lost to someone, it might be a matter of pride. Bang! That little fellow Daoist Chen is so bold that he even dares to attack Fairy Ning. Fairy Ning, you can take out your sword and chop off his dog paws. If this kind of thing were to spread out, wouldn't it be a joke to outsiders? Wait a moment, Who could spread out what happened tonight? That little fellow Daoist Chen wouldn't fall out with Fairy Ning and whisper some pillow talk to her, would he? Forget it, a pair of celestial companions that no other celestial couple in the world was like a match made in heaven. Under the moon and flowers, they were whispering sweet nothings to each other, shaming the bright moon. It was the perfect time. I'm redundant. It was better to just eat the melon. Chen Pingan gently hugged Ning Yarrow but quickly let go of her and took a step back. Why are you here? Her sideburns and ears were a little red. She didn't need any makeup, eyebrows, or makeup. Ning Yarrow returned the sword to Chen Pingan and said, "Aren't you being too careless? You dare to give your sword to someone else?" Chen Pingan took the Night Ranger and put it behind his back. He smiled and said, "Old immortal Feng Jun is a magnanimous and upright person. I'm relieved that you gave me the Night Ranger. It's not worse than carrying the sword myself." Ning Yarrow was a little confused. "Feng Jun?" Chen Pingan turned his back to the grass-eating green ox and the melon-eating old Daoist. He blinked at Ning Yarrow and reminded her, "It's the Daoist green ox that you mentioned at the Great Wall of Sword Chi. In fact, it's also this old immortal who first proposed the idea of using external talisman to refine elixirs inside. It's a pity that this old Daoist standards are too high and he suffered too many losses. That's why he wasn't able to become famous. Most people don't deserve their position and reputation. Old immortal Feng Jun is the opposite. He's someone who can fight for justice." Ning Yarrow said, "I was wondering who it was. So it's one of the 4 Daoist seniors that you mentioned before." The old Daoist who was squatting far away had been listening attentively. His eyes lit up and his shoulders trembled. The melon in his hand had a rich aftertaste. It was really sweet. "Which 4? That stinky ox nose from the Eastern Sea Monastery, Sun Huizhong from the Dashuan Monastery, the talisman Yu Xian, the great heavenly master from Mount Longhu, and venerable fire dragon. There were already 5 of them. No matter which one I managed to squeeze out, it would be a wonderful thing. It's fine even if all 4 of them were at the bottom. Why didn't little Daoist Chen mention this when he was chatting with me at Niaoju Mountain? That's not sincere enough. Since you already have such respect in your heart, why hide it? Young people can't be too thick-skinned. It's even worse if they're too thin-skinned." At that time, a dagger slipped out of his sleeve and spun around. It looked quite scary and almost made me think that I met Cao Mo. Then, I gathered the 5 Thunders Dharma in my palm and played around with it. It was nothing more than the word authentic. What? It was a little noble from the Daoist master's residence who forgot to bring the peachwood sword home. I didn't expect it to be a misunderstanding. For example, the cloud goosegrass worm disturbed my dreams and the iron horse-ice river entered my dreams. Such misunderstandings weren't bad. The old Daoist who was refreshed immediately threw away the melon in his hand. He shook his sleeves and coughed softly as a reminder. Then, he slowly got up and faced the young couple. The old Daoist didn't forget to kick the remaining melon on the ground with his heel. The old Daoist stroked his beard and smiled. After seeing the woman's ascendant realm, he thought for a while and didn't feel guilty at all. He cupped his hands and said loudly, "I'm a lord. My Daoist name is Green Bull." Chen Pingan made an exception and cupped his hands. Ning Yarrow cupped her hands and said, "Junior Ning Yarrow, nice to meet you." The old Daoist laughed heartily. This trip to Baiyang City was so tiring that he could see the 2 celestial couples with his own eyes. Finally, the lovers got married. It was worth it. Chen Pingan took out the green paper mountain voucher from his sleeve. The old Daoist's eyes were sharp. He saw that the word sell changed to buy and the 3 words stop pavilion appeared on the back. The old Daoist shuddered. Li Shalang, who was the god of Entry City, was flirtatious, but he wasn't a person who was easy to negotiate with. Especially when it came to business, he was extremely shrewd. How could Chen Pingan get this thing from him? Among the 12 cities sailing at night, except for Xiao Baohuan of the Beauty City who was still a fledgling, the other 11 old city lords each had their own temperament and each had their own great Dao supernatural power. However, none of them were easy to deal with. Chen Pingan took out another talisman and handed it to the old Daoist. Change the sword to the talisman. The business is still the same. The old Daoist was speechless. He took the cheap talisman and could only nod his head in agreement. He continued to help this brat inquire about that information. Chen Pingan brought Ning Yarrow to a pavilion in Entry City. There was a horizontal board and a stop pavilion. On the night path in by Yang City, the old Daoist sighed. He had nothing to do, so he picked up the talisman and looked at it. He immediately held his breath and rolled up the big sleeve of his Daoist robe. In an instant, he kept the talisman in his sleeve. He then reached out and grabbed something with his arms. He walked towards the mount. The green ox lay on the ground. The old Daoist sat on its back. The green ox stood up and walked slowly. The old Daoist held a melon in one hand and tapped it a few times with the other. He tilted his ear to listen and muttered to himself, "The heaven and earth are dense, all things mellow. The great sound is beautiful, the great medium is pure. It's definitely sweet." Li Shalang's maid, who came from the Yenji god office, stood at the bottom of the steps outside the pavilion. Qin Zidu, Chen Pingan, and Ning Yarrow curtsied. Then, she took out a piece of wutong leaf and said with a smile, "In the future, Mr. Chen can use this item to travel between the city gate and the pavilion. However, you still have to use it carefully. Once the strokes are used up, the city lord will take back the pavilion according to the rules." Chen Pingan indeed found that on the back of the paper to buy mountain vouchers, there were originally 3 words, "Stop Pavilion." The words were missing a vertical stroke and the whole word had disappeared. Chen Pingan and Qin Zido smiled and nodded. He reached out and grabbed the item from her hand. He took the wutong leaf from her hand. The front and back of the wutong leaf were engraved with Fu Qi Sheng and Ji Nong. The word Fu was missing a little. It was probably the same rule as buying mountain vouchers. Every time it was used, 1 stroke would be missing. As for why the word stop was missing, it must be because he violated the rules and went to Useless City, Night Sailing Ship and Entry City. Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Thank you, Miss Qin." Qin Zido smiled sweetly and said, "Mr. Chen can just call me Bu." Chen Pingan smiled and didn't say anything. He wanted to say, "We are not familiar with each other, you can just call me Sword Immortal Chen." Ning Yarrow put her hands behind her back and looked up at the signboard and couplets of the pavilion. Chen Pingan thought for a moment. He was not in a hurry to leave this place. He took out the mountain voucher again and asked, "How many answers can I exchange for this thing? For the 2 words by mountain voucher, I have to trouble Miss Qin to answer my question for every stroke that is missing. How about it?" Because there was an Ascendant Realm Sword cultivator here, the city lord definitely couldn't pry into this place casually. Therefore, Qin Zido was silent for a moment. She thought for a moment and seemed to have gotten City Lord Li Shalang's permission. She nodded and shook her head, saying, "It can be bought and sold, but the rules have to be changed. There are still 2 words left on by mountain voucher. Mr. Chen can only ask 2 questions. As for the stroke that is missing, the City Lord said that it will be a meeting gift for City Lord Ning." Chen Pingan thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. Chen Pingan didn't want to occupy this pavilion for a long time from the beginning. This night boat was not a place to stay for a long time. In an instant, Qin Zido subconsciously turned sideways and had to reach out to block her eyes. She didn't dare to look at the sword light. It turned out that the silent female sword immortal drew her sword out of the sheath without warning. She cut open the heaven and earth enchantment of the city and followed Qin Zidu's thought to find the city lord, Li Shalang. The young man in green with a sword on his back continued to stay in the same place as if nothing had happened. He smiled and asked, "May I ask Miss Qin, what are the small cities on the night boat?" Qin Zido, who was ruthlessly schemed against, was annoyed and said angrily, "You too, did you make an appointment in advance?" Chen Pingan shook his head. "Not really. On the way here, he just casually told Ning Yarrow about his experience in Lu City." Qin Zido glared at the man and said in a deep voice, "The upper 4 cities, Feather City, Lu City, Chicken and Dog City, and the City of Rules." Chen Pingan interrupted her words, "May I trouble Miss Qin to add the other names of the 4 cities?" Qin Zido didn't speak. Chen Pinggan walked to the steps of the pavilion and sat down. His hands were tucked into his sleeves and his body was slightly bent forward. However, compared to when he had just entered the city, his expression was much more relaxed. His entire person appeared very relaxed and lazy. Qin Zido said, "The other names of the 4 cities are Lu City, Wu Ya City, Dao Attainment City, and Mountain City." Chen Pinggan nodded, a little absent-minded. When he passed by earlier, he saw the Laurel Man, Long Bin, and a swordsman retainer who almost drew his sword in the distance. It was Chicken and Dog City. But he didn't know why the big stone in the heart of the water imprisoned the snow-white heart ape. So even if the city lord didn't invite him, he had to go to this Dao Attainment City. The middle 4 cities are Baiyang City, Consonant City, Chuegong City, and Peaceful City. Also known as Useless City, First City, Family Tree City, and Jiazi City. Chen Pinggan had already strolled through Chuegong City. At that time, there was a lazy man sitting on the steps outside the main hall. He only turned his head to look inside the hall and didn't have any intention of stopping him. When the wind passed by the covered bridge in the sky, there was the poor woman and the deer-horned young man standing side by side. It was most likely Consonant City, also known as the First City. It meant that there was no number 1 outside the ship, but there was one on the ship at night. Qin Zido said the last 4 cities, the lower 4 cities are Benmo City, Rumor City, Miscellaneous City, and Appearance City. Also known as Tang City, One Word City, Struggle City, and Color City. Chen Pinggan asked, "How do I go to the other city gates?" "I only said that in my entry city, I can find a bookstore and use a certain entry that has been inspected to exchange for a customs clearance document. Then, I can tell the store owner which city I want to go to. Then, I can pass without any obstruction." Chen Pinggan's fingers suddenly pinched the last word pavilion on the mountain coupon, forcibly stopping the word from fading away. He said with a smile, "Miss Qin only mentioned the method of leaving the entry city. This transaction isn't fair. What about the other 11 cities' customs clearance documents?" Chen Pinggan opened his palm and shook it. Then, he raised the mountain coupon in his other hand, Goosefeather City, Chicken Dog City, Baiyang City, Rules City, Chuegong City, Consonant City. "Forget it. I'll change this city to Appearance City and give a discount. A total of 6 cities. Qin Zido hesitated for a moment before extending his palm and bending 2 fingers, at most 3 cities. Furthermore, it has to be Chicken Dog City, Baiyang City, and Benmo City. There's no room for discussion. I don't believe that Sword Immortal Chen can hold on to this mountain coupon all the time. Chicken Dog City and Baiyang City had a good relationship with Entry City. Furthermore, Chicken Dog City's city lord Liu had the intention of letting this person go there as a guest. As for Benmo City, which was preposterous and treasured everything, it had always had the worst relationship with Entry City. Let this unruly troublemaker go and stir up trouble over there. Chen Pinggan retracted his hands and changed his words for no reason. Then let's pretend this transaction didn't happen. I'll change a small question with Miss Qin. Which city's city lord is Xiao Baohuan? Qin Zido heaved a sigh of relief and said, "It's one of the lower 4 cities, Appearance City." Chen Pinggan looked at his expression and asked with a smile, "Is it because with Entry City's customs clearance document, you might not be able to go to Appearance City now?" Qin Zido nodded. Xiao Baohuan was a city lord. Of course, he could close the door and refuse guests. Chen Pinggan released the mountain coupon on his fingertips. The words on both sides disappeared from the world. However, the genuine green talisman remained in Chen Pinggan's hands. Qin Zido said hatefully, "If Sword Immortal Chen is really the kind of pedantic and inflexible person that City Lord thinks, then it's good." What she meant was, of course, that this shrewd and scheming Mr. Chen was too outrageous to be a Sword Immortal instead of a merchant. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's precisely because I'm not that I can walk here step by step, sit on the steps of this pavilion, and talk politely with Miss Qin, doing business that makes money amicably." Qin Zido was puzzled, but did not think too much about it. She just thought that this young Sword Immortal was talking nonsense. Chen Pinggan got up and walked down the steps. He turned to look at the plaque and said softly, "What a good name. Life stops at a pavilion, there's no hurry." Qin Zido sneered. Since he liked it so much, why did he still do that business and return this pavilion to Entry City? If a passerby could take root here, it was equivalent to having an extra life-saving talisman. Scholar Du, Daoist Green Ox, and the like, all of them had worked hard to save up their own property. Moreover, compared to this pavilion, which was a land of mountains and rivers that was close to a physical object, what other paradise? It only sounded mysterious and fancy, but it was still far inferior to this pavilion. Now, he only had the one-leaf parasol tree in his hands. In the future, he could come here, but this pavilion had already been returned to its original owner. However, Qin Zido vaguely remembered that when this person heard that his city lord was Li Shilang on the streets of Entry City, there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. However, the young man's expression quickly became awkward. Perhaps it was because his cultivation in this life had been smooth, and he had never been treated so coldly in public. There was also a hint of sadness in his eyes, but it was fleeting, as if it had never happened. At that time, Qin Zido was tired of the ink ingot of Chicken and Dog City, and he was really curious about this passerby sword immortal of Entry City, so he saw these imperceptible details clearly. Qin Zido remembered another matter for no reason. It seemed that when the city lord went to see the green shirt sword immortal twice, the young outsider and Li Shilang walked side by side. There were several times when the young outsider wanted to say something but stopped. The corner of his eyes kept secretly sizing them up. When the city lord took out the mountain certificate, the young sword immortal's expression returned to normal and he began to do business. Before the city lord appeared on the streets, the deputy city lord had joked that the young man's temperament was very calm. Logically speaking, he shouldn't be so impatient. It seemed that he had been angered by Li Shilang's words of evil nature and get out of Entry City. The courtyard was less than 3 acres, and there was only one hill, so it was called Mustard Seed. Ning Yarrow took a step forward with her sword and came to the entrance of the small garden. Her eyes were unusually sharp and unreasonable. She had nothing to do with Entry City or Li Shilang. But Chen Pinggan did. Once on the city wall of her hometown, under the 3 bright moons, Ning Yarrow sat next to that person. When he was free, he would often pick up some of the treasured books beside him. Most of them were literary manuscripts accumulated in the early years. Among them, there was a painting score. Of course, Chen Pinggan didn't tell her about the Green Ox Daoist priest, but when he was lying on the city wall, he often took out the painting score to bask in the moonlight. Occasionally, he would raise his head and swear to Ning Yarrow that this Li Shilang was really an immortal. Except for one thing that couldn't be learned, his other knowledge was really fascinating. He was really too powerful. So on his bamboo slip, he engraved the proverb to make friends word for word. Don't mention the matter of being conferred the title of Marquis, let's drink together in the narrow alley was also beautifully written. Li Shilang's explanation of the difference between scholarly articles and legendary plays was even better. Turns out it was about the same as reasoning with people. Especially Li Shilang's business, it was even better. It was just that when it came to the matter of other booksellers engraving books, he wasn't so magnanimous. It was a pity that she couldn't meet this Mr. Li, otherwise, she really wanted to ask this Li Shilang if he was really so poor and destitute. Did he really have a detestable life? Also, when Mr. Li was born, did he really meet an immortal to help him read his fortune? Did the stars really come to this place? Was the ancestral home too small, and the immortal was only born after moving to the ancestral hall of the family? If Li Shilang was easy to talk to, she would have to ask again if Mr. Li had repaired the ancestral hall after he made his fortune and brought glory to the family. Perhaps in the 2 plaques of the ancestral hall, the immortal incense could be born. Ning Yarrow couldn't understand. How could she let such a Li Shilang talk endlessly on the city wall back then? Was it necessary? So what if she really met Li Shilang in this Tiemu city? Did she still want to ask Mr. Li about the doubts in her heart in the past? Li Shilang and the old scholar who was the deputy city lord walked out of the mustard seed garden in the painting. Li Shilang frowned and asked, "Is something the matter?" Ning Yarrow nodded and said, "Yes. Li Shilang smiled and asked, "What's the matter?" Ning Yarrow turned to look at the white-haired old man and said, "It has nothing to do with old Mr. Senior, please step aside." The old scholar smiled and said, Okay. It's only right." Li Shilang immediately reached out and grabbed his old friend's sleeve. The old scholar waved his sleeve vigorously and left. In an instant, the world was filled with sword light. As a result, a huge hole was opened in the entire night boat by a sword light. The scholar on the mountain peak sighed. With a slight thought, he mended the hole in the ferry. Fortunately, the existence of this ferry was similar to the Great Wall of Sword Chi in the past. This was also one of the foundations of the Great Tao of the night boat. And the ferry knowledge that Chen Pinggan had comprehended in the word interaction was also one of them. The monk on the praying mat also opened his eyes. He stretched and was about to get up. The middle-aged scholar smiled and said, "There's no need for now." The white-haired old man returned to his original spot and couldn't help but laugh. He saw the city lord Li Shilang holding a tattered picture book in his hand. Fragments of the book kept gathering from all directions. The old scholar clicked his tongue in wonder and joked, "Being questioned by the number one person in the world can be considered a beautiful story in our entry city. Thinking of this, I'm not willing to resign from my position as the deputy city lord. I'll just be a few hundred more years." And at the pavilion, Ning Yarrow took a step forward and returned to the place. She put her sword back into the box and said, "I've seen the mustard seed garden. There's nothing good about it." Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. He rubbed his cheeks with both hands and inevitably felt a little regretful. "I see." Then, Chen Pinggan picked up the parasol leaf and took Ning Yarrow to the inn in the city. He only hoped that Xiaomi wouldn't follow Pei Qian's example and kowtow when they met. Ning Yarrow suddenly said, "Aren't you going to say goodbye to Miss Bu?" Chen Pinggan was speechless. Qin Zidu squeezed out a smile and said with a trembling voice, "There's no need." The parasol leaf in Chen Pinggan's hand flashed and he arrived at the city gate with Ning Yao. They walked to the inn in the city. There was no night ban in Entry City, but compared to the bustling streets during the day, it was still slightly deserted. There were no more stalls on the streets, and all the shops were closed. There were only a few restaurants, and there were still lights and noise. Ning Yarrow was silent for a moment and said, "I shouldn't have drawn my sword." Chen Pinggan held her hand. "There's no such thing as should or should." Ning Yarrow looked at the streets on both sides. "Is this the Entry City where knowledge can be sold for money?" Chen Pinggan nodded and smiled. "Very good." As expected of Li Shilang. At the entrance of the inn, Pei Qian and Xiaomi were waiting at the door. Little Millet, who had been pretending to be calm all this while, suddenly became anxious. Because she had been trying so hard for too long, she was smiling too hard. She foolishly looked at the woman beside the good person mountain chieftain. She tugged on Pei Qian's sleeve with all her might and stomped her feet. Her smile didn't change in the slightest as she hurriedly coaxed, Pei Qian, why don't I kowtow?" Pei Qian tiptoed and waved at his master and mistress from afar. He said softly, "There's really no need." Xiaomi couldn't maintain her smile and said bitterly, "There's really no need." Pei Qian rubbed the head of the black-clothed girl and said gently, "There's really no need. In the future, when Cao Qinglang and Jing Qing are by your side, you can kowtow when you see mistress." The little girl scratched her face and remembered. Ning Yarrow shook her wrist and Chen Pinggan had to let go. At the inn, Ning Yarrow nodded to Pei Qian. Pei Qian smiled and called her mistress. Ning Yarrow bent down and rubbed Xiaomi's head. She smiled and said, "In my hometown, everyone knows that the Mute Lake wine can make many sword immortals speechless. They can only continue to drink." Xiaomi nodded and took a step back. She quickly reached into her sleeve and took out a big handful of melon seeds. She raised it high above her head and offered it with both hands. She said loudly, "Mistress, please have some melon seeds." Ning Yarrow was a little surprised. Chen Pinggan held back his laughter. In the Shiwan Mountains, there was a 14th level cultivator and an ascendant state cultivator at the peak of the mountain. In the end, there was only a thatched cottage. It was probably just the old blind man's place of residence. It was probably also the place of cultivation. Now that he had taken in a disciple who only recognized half of his master, he had to have a place to stay. It was not that Li Huai was not used to a hard life. It was just that he had been in Jianghu for a long time, especially when he was with Pei Qian. He had heard of all kinds of tricks in Jianghu. He had also seen how difficult it was to make a living as a martial artist at the foot of the mountain. No matter how he looked at it, he felt like he had fallen into a den of Jianghu swindlers. He saw the old man in yellow running around and chopping firewood in order to build a new thatched cottage. It was said that he was an ascendant state cultivator. Who would believe that? Anyway, Li Huai did not believe it. At that time, Li Huai felt sympathy for him. He could not help but feel sorry for the old senior Duke Longshan's diligence and, he did not have a fixed residence. Li Huai said to build 2 rooms for the new thatched cottage so that they could live together. He could also help and build a residence together. Anyway, it was fine as long as it could shelter them from the wind and rain. As a result, when the old man in yellow heard that Li Huai wanted to help, it was almost like a battle of the great Tao. The old man spoke righteously and refused to let go. He said that the young master's body was priceless. How could his hands touch such lowly work? He also said that he did not dare to live with the young master. He would only disturb the young master's study. Besides, it was actually quite cool on the other side of the fence. Therefore, when the old man was busy, Li Huai squatted at the side and chatted with him. Only then did he know that this ascendant state senior, whose Daoist name was Duke Longshan and temporary name was Koflu, had actually wandered in the vast world for more than 10 years just to talk to him. Li Huai could not help but ask the senior what he was after. The old man almost drank 10 pounds of bitter tears on the spot. He lowered his head and chopped firewood. His expression was as lonely as a lonely mountain. It turned out that this old man in yellow, although his Daoist name was Duke Longshan, in fact, in the wilderness earlier, he had countless incarnations and many aliases, including Doubting, Crane Lord, Gengyun, and now this Koflu. They all sounded very elegant. It was just that every time Li Huai did not know what the old senior said wrong, a series of inexplicable firecrackers would be inexplicably heard. Then, he would be forced to reveal his original form and roll on the ground. Otherwise, he would be kicked off the top of the mountain by the old blind man who was half a master. In this bumpy way, when the hut was finally built, it was really only Li Huai's residence. Because the hut opposite had become Li Huai's study, Li Huai caught a glimpse of those headache-inducing books. In the end, the old man asked him what books he lacked and could help him find them. No matter how rare a book was, as long as it was in the wilderness, it would not be a problem. At that time, Li Huai felt that there was a reason why this old senior could not mix in the Jianghu. Do I, Li Huai, look like a scholar? Today, in the study room, the old man in yellow, who had given himself the pseudonym Wu Fengshe, moved a chair and sat at the door today. He did not dare to disturb his young master's study. After a long silence, he saw Li Huai put down the book in his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. The old man sincerely admired him and said, "Young master is young, but your state of mind is very stable. You are naturally born, unlike me. I have lived for thousands of years, but I have really lived like a dog." As for why he gave himself the name Wu Fengshe, of course, it was to seek an auspicious omen. He hoped that with the addition of Uncle Li Huai, he would be able to bask in some of the light and follow the change of fortune. Li Huai put down the book and said honestly, "What accepting a disciple? What acknowledging a master? I did not take it seriously. No matter why the old blind senior was willing to accept me as a disciple, I am still me. If I disappoint him, I am sorry, but what can I do? I did not disappoint him, so of course I am happy. Old blind man who is half a master, you don't have to thank me anyway. We are half a master and disciple, so there is no need to be so polite." The word blind made the old man in yellow tremble with fear. This old man Li Huai was most likely fine, but he himself was not. The old man felt that he had to do something. He hurriedly stood up, shook his sleeves, and threw out a pile of objects on the table. The cluster of Osman thus in Guanghanyu Mountain was cut into strips. The essence of fire was picked and refined into a brush holder. There was an open book of cursive calligraphy with a poem on it. There was a drawing of a coral brush holder in the middle. The old man pinched the coral brush holder with 2 fingers and actually twisted it out. He then gently placed it on the table. There was also an old dragon lying across the swamp inkstone. The inscription was not small, raising jade bones, a 1,000-year object. When the owner uses it, the light is strange. There was also a jasper lotus pond pen washing pen with the inscription Young Day Oyst. The brush was gentle and delicate. Li Huai was puzzled. Old senior, what are you doing? Li Huai could roughly tell the quality of the things on the table. However, in this way, Li Huai complained incessantly in his heart. Is there an end to this? I came here to sightsee. It's fine if I have to pretend to flip through books every day because of you, old senior, but don't tell me I have to pretend to be refined and practice calligraphy and painting. The old man in yellow even said with a flattering face, young master is a rare scholar. This little gift is not enough to show my respect, not enough to show my respect. It was hard to imagine that this was a famous Ascendant Realm great demon in the world of desolation. Among the great demons on the throne, there was Fei Fei, that old woman, Huang Luan who had once been his brother, and old Deaf. He was very familiar with all of them. The little girl in Golden Jade City had a story with him. Even old Dong of the Great Wall of Sword Chi was chased and bitten by him when he was traveling the world of desolation. As for Alliance, there was no need to mention him. Every time this son of a B***TCH passed by 100,000 mountains, Old Blind would let him do whatever he wanted. Therefore, his most famous alias was Dao Ting. Dao Ting in the world of desolation, Jiyu Qingsong in the world of desolation. These two people were slightly famous everywhere in the world. Old Blind walked into the thatched cottage with his hands behind his back. He stood at the door and glanced at the items on the table. He frowned at the watchdog and said, "Fancy things, carrying bones home on the street. Are you courting death?" Hearing this, the old man in yellow's eyelids trembled. His sincerity and kindness to take credit did not work. Instead, his loyalty and hot-blooded heart were drenched in cold water. Li Huai stood up and helped the old senior out of the predicament. He asked with a smile, "I don't have a name. I can't really call you Old Blind every day, right?" Old Blind smiled and said, "Old Blind is not bad. Just call me that." Li Huai gave him a thumbs up and said, "It's more and more to my taste. You're half a master now." The old man in yellow glanced at Old Blind, who was smiling so much that flowers were about to bloom on his old face. He then looked at Li Huai, who had repeatedly courted death but did not die. Finally, he thought about his own miserable situation and felt that there was no way he could continue living like this. On this day, there was a rare bit of smoke and fire on the mountain peak. Finally, a large pot of stewed meat was placed on the table. It was steaming hot and fragrant. At first, Li Huai felt apologetic and did not dare to eat. However, when he saw Old Blind take the lead and the old man in yellow did not hesitate at all, Li Huai did not hold back. Old Blind glanced at him and the old man in yellow immediately took the bowl and left the table. Li Huai stepped on the bench and picked up a large piece of dog meat with his chopsticks. He slammed the table and said angrily, "Damn it, Old Blind, do you still have the slightest bit of loyalty?" Li Huai smiled at the old senior and helped support him. "Don't get up. Let's sit down and eat. Don't worry about Old Blind. We're all family. Who are you trying to show off your power to every day?" After all, his mouth was soft after eating food. Of course, it was not some dog meat that was cut off from the old man in yellow's body. In the 100,000 mountains, there were still some mountain delicacies. Otherwise, Li Huai really did not dare to eat half of it. It was too scary. The old man in yellow thought for a while and felt that it would be safer for him to take the bowl outside and not be an eyesore. In any case, he could eat a full bowl. Unexpectedly, Old Blind sneered and said, "There's meat on the table and you don't want to eat it. Are you going to dig up dirt and eat shit outside?" The old man in yellow was both sad and happy at the same time. He could only lower his head and eat the meat silently. The taste was not bad. What a good salty taste. Li Huai, this little bastard's cooking was really good. Old Blind did not eat much. He chewed slowly and suddenly said, You will follow Li Huai back to his hometown this time. Weigh the pros and cons yourself. If you do well, we will settle old scores. As for what would happen if he did not do well, Old Blind was too lazy to say. The old man in yellow nodded vigorously. When he saw Li Huai take a piece of meat for Old Blind, he followed suit and quickly took a large piece of meat for Uncle Li. He suddenly realized that it was not bad to follow Uncle Li. Wasn't he on the same level as Old Blind to eat a pot of meat? However, the old man in yellow, who had good eyesight, realized that every time Li Huai took a piece of meat for Old Blind, it was as if he was giving it to another old man. The young man was smiling and talking nonsense. However, he was still not experienced enough because his eyes did not hide his words. In the sky of the Central Plains, a figure the size of a mustard seed suddenly appeared and fell straight to the ground. While falling, the man spread out his hands and spun non-stop. He floated to the ground and lowered his head. He put 2 fingers together and pressed them against his forehead, while the other hand stretched out behind him. It was hard to say whether this posture would look cool or not in the eyes of others. In any case, he had thought for a long time to come up with this way of appearing. However, this was the square of the Central Plains Confucian Temple. A sage of the Confucian Temple only glanced at him and chose to ignore him. He even told the gentleman nearby to ignore him and not try to get close to him. Only an old scholar left the forest of merits and virtue and appeared here. He was very supportive. He turned his head and covered his face with one hand. He waved his hand and said, "Where did this handsome young man come from? Quickly, keep your dignified appearance and walk like a dragon or a tiger." The man looked wronged and shouted, "Old scholar." The 2 of them quickly walked over and shook hands. The old scholar sighed and shook his hand vigorously. When I became friends with He Fen Fen, they said that there was only one person who could be together. The man sighed and said, "A handshake in the midst of thousands of people made my sleeves fragrant for 3 years. Poetry competition?" The old scholar did not learn from his mistakes. He had found the wrong opponent. The old scholar's eyes lit up. He lowered his voice and said, "I've never heard of it before. Where did you copy it from? Can you lend it to me?" The man blushed and said, "It's my humble work. I came up with it on the spur of the moment. Take it, take it. There's no need to be so polite between brothers." No matter who borrowed it, they would be scolded together. The 2 of them hugged each other. They almost looked like a pair of brothers who were about to cry on each other's shoulders. The old scholar hammered the guy's back with all his strength and clicked his tongue in wonder. "Brother Liang, your muscles are even stronger than before." The sloppy man with stubble on his face wailed, old scholar, I've missed you so much. Not only did I almost die, but I also finally got rid of that tortoise shell with great difficulty. These years have been really hard. Just mentioning this makes me want to cry." The old scholar hit the man's back harder and said, "It's been hard on both of us. It's not easy. Good brothers don't have it easy." Alliance coughed and asked, "Old scholar, why do you look like you've lost weight? Is it because you have a big chest and your heart cares about the world?" The old scholar let go of his hand and complained, "You always say such embarrassing truths." Alliance spat and ran his fingers through his hair. He didn't have much hair and it took him a lot of effort to tie it into a small bun. It was no wonder that he didn't like to come here. There were no girls. As a worthy descendant of one of the 4 great families, the number of times he took the initiative to come here could be counted on one's fingers. In addition, every time he was called here to confront and reason with someone, he was called here to apologize. Only the old scholar wasn't idle. He would always be the first to jump out and deliberately stand on the side of the other party. It was as if everyone had been wronged. The old scholar's voice was the loudest and fiercest. He would always fan the flames. He would either speak up for the other party or say something ruthless, saying that he should just kill this guy. How could being imprisoned in the Forest of Merits for a few years be enough? In any case, Alliance had gotten used to it. As long as the old scholar was present, he would lower his head and apologize with a sincere expression. He would get angry with whoever tried to stop him. However, in the years before the old scholar became a sacrificial sage, Alliance wasn't so easy to talk to. He would even ignore the invitations from the Confucian temple. Even if the quasi-sage personally brought him to the Confucian temple to question him, he wouldn't say anything and just do whatever he wanted. Today, Alliance didn't need to apologize to anyone. The old scholar didn't seem to be used to having nothing to do. He sighed and asked in confusion, "Why are you so late? Didn't you return to Howran long time ago? Why are you strolling around Liuxia continent?" Alliance pointed at the top of his head and said helplessly, "At least I've grown some hair. Otherwise, if I dare to go anywhere, I'll only make the girls feel sorry for me. When I arrived at Liuxia continent, I wanted to look for big sister Tsung Nyo to talk about old times. However, I didn't expect her to not be at home. I heard that she went to the old site of the Rain Dragon sect and hasn't returned home for many years. I asked big sister Tsung Nyo's disciple to help me send a message on a flying sword. I received a reply very quickly. It was concise and comprehensive. It only had 2 words. Wait. Old scholar, listen to it. Isn't it very sincere? The old scholar stomped his foot and lamented on Alliance's behalf. Then you should wait. Alliance chuckled and said, I'll wait. I'm afraid that once we meet, big sister Tsung Nyo won't be able to hold herself back. The old scholar also chuckled. Alliance suddenly became silent and looked at the thin old man who had never been tall. The old scholar couldn't go anywhere at this time. It was different from when he imprisoned himself in the meritorious forest. The 2 of them walked toward the steps in front of the Confucian temple and sat down together. Alliance told him some interesting stories on the way here. He said that in a certain restaurant in Liuxia continent, he learned from the old scholar and ate and drank without paying. Since he couldn't write an IOU, he shouted angrily and took out a brush. He wanted to leave behind a piece of calligraphy to help inscribe the plaque. After the brush and ink were served, he wrote the words with great vigor. He put in more effort than the words carved on the city wall. However, the shopkeeper didn't know what was good for him and asked for the money for the food, wine, and paper. Thus, he could only owe them for now. He also said that in a place where colorful dresses fluttered and embroidered shoes were everywhere, he happened to hear a group of people talking about him. He felt a little embarrassed, especially the 2 young ladies. Their beautiful eyes seemed to be filled with the words Alliance and Big Brother, making people drunk as if they had drunk fine wine. As for him, he was the kind of person who couldn't stand others praising him. Thus, he straightened his clothes and went over with an empty bowl of wine. He told them the truth, saying that a 14th realm sword cultivator wasn't that great and didn't mean much. In the end, he praised him for being bald and even asked why he didn't just say that his second brother wasn't really invincible. Since he had already told them the truth, he could only sit there for a while and listen to the customers chat for a while. Both sides were having a good time. He was busy calling them brothers and getting some food to go with the wine. In the end, he couldn't stand the admiring gazes of the young ladies and was worried that he would attract unnecessary love debts. Thus, he put down the bowl of wine and left the restaurant. He stopped in his tracks and looked up at the setting sun. Then, he took an even more learned step and walked alone on the street. He could only leave behind a lonely back view that would break the hearts of women, and the debt of wine that he had accidentally forgotten. The old scholar gently patted the knee of the man beside him and praised, "Not bad, not bad. You're still as elegant as ever. You didn't even give anyone a discount." Alliance laughed loudly. The sloppy man with not much hair told the old scholar many interesting stories about his travels. He said that he had made a trip to the heavens and met old man Yu, who was working hard to integrate with the way of the Milky Way. He didn't talk about the 14th realm, so as to avoid old man Yu, who was older and had an average aptitude for cultivation. He only said that he had always been jealous of all the friends around him. Why did they have such a handsome and elegant friend, but he, Alliance, didn't? After old man Yu heard this, he didn't speak for a long time. It was probably because he felt guilty and ashamed of his own inferiority. However, old man Yu said something in the end that sounded like a scholar. He said that what an old man would think of was his hometown, his childhood, and his youth. The only place Alliance didn't mention was the last place he stopped at in the Liuxia continent. It was a mass grave in the wilderness. There wasn't even the slightest bit of evil aura, let alone the lingqi of heaven and earth. The man sat cross-legged, his hands clenched into fists and lightly pressed against his knees. He didn't speak and didn't drink. He just sat there and dozed off until dawn. The sun rose from the east and the world was bright. Only then did he open his eyes, as if it was a new day. It didn't matter what Alliance said. The old scholar sat at the side and listened carefully. It seemed that he had always been like this. As long as someone else spoke, regardless of whether it was reasonable or not, whether it was big or small, interesting or not, the old scholar would always be like this. His expression was serious and extremely patient. He would wait for the others to finish speaking before continuing his own words. Perhaps only this kind of old man could teach such a disciple. The first disciple Kui Dong, the left and right disciples, Qi Jing Chun, Jun Qian, and the last disciple, Chen Pinggan. Alliance asked softly, "The left and right idiot, hasn't he returned from outer space yet?" The old scholar made a sound of acknowledgement. In the outer space where fists, legs, and swords could be used at will. Around the two people who were facing each other in the air, there were specks of light. They were all distant stars. A little girl with a ponytail was holding half of her wrist in one hand. As she fiddled with the wound, she glared at the other person and said, "Is that enough? Do you have to stop me from going to the wilderness? Do you believe that if you piss me off, I will crash into the South Swirl continent or the Tongya continent and completely destroy your pitiful teacher?" Dressed in a green robe and expressionless, she held a sword in one hand. Her sword aura was no longer restrained. "I beg you to go." It wasn't easy for her to temporarily borrow that slender wrist. Xiao Chuo shook her arm and smiled brightly. "Then I won't trouble your teacher. I'll go somewhere else. I'll go to the Luorpa mountain in the Aquarius continent and pay a visit to our hidden official." The left and right sword thrust out. At a ferry in the wilderness, the Mohist Juzi, who guarded the South Swirl continent with the mellow scholar Chen Chunan, was here alone. One was building a city, while the other was guarding it. Neither was delayed. A burly man with a little demon by his side traveled from the ultimate ruins on the sea to the wilderness. Along the way, he deliberately avoided the forces on the mountains and only looked at the mountains and rivers. Liu Shiliu looked up at the strange city that grew on its own. The little demon, who called himself the Whirlwind King, had the appearance of a child and carried a big bag. It wasn't that his master asked for it. The bag was full of the little demon's belongings that he couldn't bear to throw away. At this moment, he stood at the edge of the ferry and said in a small voice, "Master, the books say that it's better to avoid trouble. It seems like we have to take a detour." The little demon couldn't help but complain, "Let's go, Master. When will it end?" Liu Shiliu smiled and said, "I wanted to bring you to see your little martial uncle. Now, I can't. It seems like we have to walk a long way." The little demon sighed and said, "Annoying, annoying. It would be great if I could see little martial uncle sooner." Liu Shiliu smiled and nodded. "After passing the Great Wall of Sword Chi, Master can find a ferry and it will be easier." The little demon said, "Master, I don't have any divine money." Liu Shiliu rubbed the little guy's head. "You're the same as your little martial uncle. You're not careless when it comes to important matters, but you're stingy when it comes to small matters." The little demon suddenly felt a little nervous and whispered, "Master, I'm a little demon. Little martial uncle is the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Chi. Will he despise me?" Liu Shiliu smiled and said, "No. He's your little martial uncle." The little demon hesitated for a moment. "Where's eldest martial uncle? Where's eldest martial uncle Chi? I really can't see him." Liu Shiliu nodded. "There's nothing we can do." 775. Pei Qian felt a little helpless as he looked at Xiao Mili, who was trying her best to laugh foolishly. Fortunately, it was you, the right guardian of Luo Po Mountain. Otherwise, not to mention Chen Lingjun, even a proud student like Cao Qinglang would be in trouble tomorrow. Zhu Mili bade farewell and ran to her room. When she came back, she brought a big bag of melon seeds and a small bag of dried brookfish. Chen Pinggan stood by the window and looked at the sky. Then, he took out a lantern lighting talisman and burned it slowly. It was no different from the previous 2 talismans. Then, he made a sword sign with 2 fingers and silently chanted the word rise. A golden sword aura swam like a dragon and finally connected head to tail, drawing a big golden circle in the room. It created a forbidden area with a golden lightning pool. The talisman array's atmosphere was almost like a small world. Compared to Pei Qian's previous imitation of the iron rod on the street, Chen Ping'an's array was obviously more flexible and conformed to the meaning of Tao. A saying immediately popped up in Pei Qian's mind. The heavenly Tao was mysterious. When he was learning martial arts in the bamboo house, the old man who taught him martial arts often said that Pei Qian's aptitude was too poor. He was not even as good as his master. He was not interesting at all. Even when Pei Qian became the famous Zheng Qian and returned to Luopo Mountain, there was one time when he sparred with old Chef. After Zhu Lian withdrew his fist, he happened to say something similar. Compared to the mountain master, he was still a little lacking. Ning Yarrow chewed on melon seeds and asked, "This is a sword array?" Obviously, Ning Yarrow also felt that this sword art that was integrated with the array was not simple. Chen Ping'an nodded and said, "I learned it from someone. I just added some of my own sword art and fist intent." This nameless array formation originated from his student, Kui Dongshan. The latter liked to use a sword immortal relic, golden tassel, to draw a circle that isolated the world. It was extremely profound. Later, at Luopa Mountain, Chen Ping'an pulled Liu Jinglong and Kui Dongshan together. Chen Ping'an took out a secret record that was copied from the Summer Palace. It was somewhat related to the Thunder Pool in the inverted hanging mountain, but the written record was more ancestral. It was related to the sword cleansing pool in the Doshu courtyard of the Thunder Department. Chen Ping'an let the 2 of them flip through the records. In the end, Liu Jinglong and Kui Dongshan worked together to perfect the formation. However, Chen Ping'an was still used to adding some of his own fist intent and the 18 stops of sword chi that Alliance had taught him. Since he was on the ferry, he was still living under someone else's roof. It was not appropriate for him to talk about Ascension City and Luopa Mountain. Previously, Li Shilang's observation of the mountains and rivers had been exposed by Chen Ping'an. Hence, both sides opened the window and spoke frankly. Since it was the city lords spying on the inn, it was also a kind of reminder. It meant that in this city, especially on this night boat, as long as the heavens of this world were willing, there was nothing that was unknown. At that moment, the group was already in the array formation. Chen Ping'an looked at Pei Qian. Pei Qian immediately understood and reported a number. Before Chen Ping'an ascended and left the city, Chen Ping'an used his voice to speak to Pei Qian in riddles. From the moment Chen Ping'an left the inn to look for Ning Yarrow, Pei Qian had already been counting. He only gave the number when his master asked. Ning Yarrow was a little puzzled. Chen Ping'an smiled and explained, "I'm afraid of being schemed against and being kept in the dark without realizing it. If I'm not careful, I'll delay my trip to the North Continent too much." Chen Ping'an put 2 of his fingers together and gently shook his wrist. From the flying sword cage in the small world of his body, he actually took out a half-burnt lamp-raising talisman. This was the same as the Daoist priest Greenox and the curly-bearded man. It could be considered a completely different world on the ferry. After lighting up a lamp, the difference between the small world and the lamp-raising talisman hovering at the window was not small. Finally, Chen Ping'an discovered a rather deeply hidden truth. He sneered, "On this side of the ferry, there really is someone secretly controlling the speed of the long river of time. If they want to do it without anyone noticing, they can do it in the mountains for 60 years and in the world for 1,000 years. It's definitely not Li Shilang from Entry City. It's very likely that it's the ship's owner." Kui Dongshan's heaven and earth in the sleeve could make a cultivator in a cage pass a day like a year. Naturally, it could also let the person in the trap experience what it meant to pass by in a flash. Pei Qian's scalp went numb when he heard this. Imagine being on the ferry at night for 10 days to half a month, leisurely strolling through the 12 cities. However, when they left the ferry, they realized that months or even years had passed in the vast world. Chen Ping'an walked to the windowsill and said in a clear voice, I'll have to trouble Li Shilang to tell the ship's owner that it doesn't matter if the ferry is now close to the entrance of the ultimate or directly going to the wasteland. However, since I've already noticed that it's changing the river of time, can it be avoided? Previously, on the street and in the inn, Chen Pinggan had lit 2 lamp-raising talismans to help the ferry. They mistakenly thought that Chen Pinggan was full of himself. He thought that his Tao was high enough and his spells were invincible in the continent. He became the ancestor of other sects. He thought that he was far-sighted and that all the opportunities were in his bag. He relied on a longevity lamp from the ancestral hall to luckily climb the mountain and walk the path of cultivation. Chen Pinggan stood at the window for a moment before turning to look at Ning Yao. Ning Yao shook her head and said, either the ship's owner didn't pay attention to this side, or the other party's Tao is high enough that I can't detect any clues. Chen Pinggan nodded and returned to his seat. He asked softly, how long can we stay in the vast world this time? Ning Yao plucked 3 melon seeds from the mountain of melon seeds with her fingers. Chen Pinggan slammed the table with a deafening sound. He cursed angrily, only 3 months. Has the person in charge of the Confucian temple lost his mind? Or is there something wrong with his brain? Don't worry about it. I'll scold anyone who dares to rush you. Ning Yao shook her head gently. Chen Pinggan said in shock, only 3 days? Ning Yao remained silent. Chen Pinggan frowned and rubbed his chin. He narrowed his eyes and began to think carefully. Zhu Mili hurriedly plucked another pile of melon seeds for the hill master's wife to eat more. In an instant, Ning Yao's sword left its scabbard. She held the sword in one hand and suddenly slashed the air in the room. Ning Yao instantly swam away with her sword. Ning Yao didn't need to say anything. Ning Yao and Chen Pinggan didn't have any telepathic communication. However, they didn't even need to look at each other. Chen Pinggan had already followed Ning Yao and disappeared in a flash. They arrived at a mountain peak. It was where Xiao Baohuan stood when he met the ship's owner. However, the middle-aged scholar and the sleeping monk were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, the mountain peak was empty except for a cattail hassock. Chen Pinggan reached behind him and gently placed his hand on the scabbard on his back. Night Ranger, which had been unsheathed by an inch, returned to its scabbard. He looked around and praised, the grotto heaven in a flask is such a beautiful place. It's hard for anyone to return the favor when the owner treats his guests so well. Chen Pinggan squatted down and carefully looked at the cattail hassock. It seemed that the ship's owner had deliberately left it as a reward for solving the mystery. Ning Yao leaned on the immortal sword naivety with both hands. She looked down at the golden palace in the sea of clouds and said, it's still difficult to catch the ship's owner with just you and me. Guests have their manners. Risking one's life has its own way of fighting. Chen Pinggan left the cattail hassock behind and stood up. He smiled at Ning Yao and said, let's go back. Ning Yao extended her sword. Over at the inn in Entry City, Ning Yao and Chen Pinggan returned together. Pei Qian had already sat down on the long bench beside Zhu Mili. Little Mili had remained in her previous posture of munching on melon seeds, like a wooden puppet. Only when the good mountain chieftain and his wife returned did little Mili continue munching on melon seeds. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, it's nothing. We went to an interesting place just now and almost met Teacher Zhong. Let's chat more casually. Chen Pinggan took out 4 pots of wine, 2 pots of osmanthus wine, and 1 pot of glutinous rice wine from his hometown. He then took out 4 wine bowls and placed them on the table. They were all from his wine shop at the Great Wall of Sword Chi. He handed the pot of glutinous rice wine to Pei Qian and said that he and Xiaomi could drink some today. Just don't drink too much. He poured a bowl of osmanthus wine for himself and Ning Yao and asked tentatively, is it really only 3 days? It's 3 years. But I won't stay for too long. Ning Yao said, before I came here, I killed an ancient remnant, the one-eyed man. He seemed to be one of the 12 high-level gods. I earned a lot of merits from the Confucian temple. Being able to kill the one-eyed man has something to do with me breaking through the bottleneck and ascending to the ascendant realm. It's not just the difference of one realm and the difference in swordsmanship. It's just that the time and place are not on my opponent's side. So compared to the first time, it's much easier. Breaking through the realm and ascending. 2 rounds of swordsmanship, time and place, one-eyed man, high-level god. When she said this, Ning Yao's tone was calm, and her expression was normal. It was not that she deliberately made it sound shocking, but for Ning Yao, there was nothing much to say about all the troubles in the past. But today, Ning Yao added, if you were here, it would be easier. It was just that Ning Yao didn't say whether Ascension City would be more relaxed with the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi or if she would be more relaxed with Chen Pinggan by her side. Maybe it was both. Maybe it was the same. Ning Yao had nothing to be embarrassed about because what she said was the truth. Even the entire Ascension City would not deny this fact, especially the swordsman of the hidden official's lineage, the martial arts lineage of the criminal official, and the young swordsman of the lineage of the Quan Mansion. They especially missed the young hidden official who had left behind too many interesting deeds and countless stories. Even if it was for various reasons, those swordsmen who did not have a good impression of the wine shop's second shopkeeper and half a foreigner, when they were drinking together, they would often talk about this person, whether it was from afar, his alliance, from close up, his the hidden official, or he knocked down the second shopkeeper with one punch, or he went to the battlefield in a fancy way. They were all topics of conversation and excellent side dishes. For example, even among the 9 sword fairy embryos that Chen Pinggan brought back to the vast world, there would be children who did not like the young hidden official, and there was more than one of them. However, no one could deny that when facing the enemy, on their side, there was always a hidden official by their side. When sheathing his sword, he would help to give advice and suggestions, find loopholes, and fill in the gaps. When he attacked with his sword, he would also be in danger and risk his life. The difference between the two was indeed not small. Hearing this, Chen Pinggan felt a little guilty. He raised his wine bowl, took a sip of wine, and picked up a dried fish from the creek of his family's Luopa mountain as a side dish. Ning Yao said, in that new world where opportunities are everywhere, if anyone can kill an ancient god, even if it's not one of the 12 high positions, as long as they are lucky, they can obtain a supernatural power. Daoist Shan Qing, Lady Guan Huang Ting of Tongya Continent, and Heatstroke of Liuxia Continent. According to the intelligence of the Ascension City, they all have their own opportunities. What Ning Yao meant was, of course, that if Chen Pinggan was also in the 5th world, even if it was the Ascension City or the hidden official's lineage, he would definitely be very busy every day. He would be a heaven-grade burden house. Chen Pinggan told her about the ruins of Taiping Mountain. He hoped that Huang Ting would not be too worried. As long as she returned to the vast world, she could immediately rebuild her sect. Ning Yao nodded and said, when I return, I will go and tell the Lady Guan. Seeing that Chen Pinggan was staring at her, Ning Yao asked, do you need me to pass on a message? Are you not in a hurry? Chen Pinggan said firmly, no. Ning Yao took a sip of wine. Xiaomi felt that she could finally speak. Turning her head, she asked softly, Pei Qian, is she the female Taoist elder sister who taught you the sword-carrying technique and the knife-dragging technique? You even said that she's very pretty, but she has a bad eye for people. The master and disciple at the table had a headache. Pei Qian said awkwardly, did I say that? Zhu Mili looked at Pei Qian, then looked at the good mountain master and his wife. She hesitated and said, you didn't, right? She felt that she probably said something wrong. She quickly drank a big mouthful of glutinous rice wine and said with a laugh, my alcohol tolerance is not good. I was drunk. Ning Yao smiled. It seemed that she needed to talk more with Xiaomi. When it came to the affinity of the elders on Luopo Mountain, other than Sister Nuanshu, no one dared to say that they were second. Chen Pinggan's 2 senior brothers, Zhuo Yu and Zhun Qian, although they did not stay on Luopo Mountain for long, without exception, they chatted with Xiaomi the most. They really liked to chat with Zhu Mili, because this little water monster of the Mute Lake was the most innocent. Head butler Zhu Lian was too watertight, Mountain Master Wei Pai was too reserved, Nuanshu was too busy every day, and Chen Lingjun would avoid them. Only Xiaomi, who liked to patrol the mountain, liked to ask all kinds of questions and would answer all of them. Chen Pinggan immediately changed the topic. After chatting for a while, Pei Qian learned that his master had long admired Li Shilang of Luopo City. Pei Qian felt a little strange. It was hard to imagine that his master would admire someone so much. Ju Mili scratched her face. It was quite awkward. It was not worse than being chased out of the poetry competition back then. Chen Pinggan did not think that Li Shilang would disappoint people when he saw a real living immortal outside of the books. He smiled at Pei Qian and said, "Do you still remember when you were young, when you were rushing at night in Tongya Continent, I taught you those jingles to boost your courage?" Chen Pinggan took a sip of wine and tapped the table with 2 fingers. He smiled and said, "Door to door, street to street. Day to day, home to a foreign land. Qingxia Palace on the ground, Guanghan Palace in the sky. Master the talisman of the 5 mountains, hanging the sword of the 7 stars." Pei Qian grinned. Cook early garlic, cut spring celery, locust tree to willow, cypress to regular. Yellow dog to Qing Luan, lake to cliff. 2 white jade chopsticks at the foot of the mountain, immortal 9-turn purple gold pill. Chen Pinggan nodded. "Actually, these are the rhymes that I compiled according to Li Shilang. I chose and cut them out before teaching you. When master first went out to travel, he often carried this. These beautiful words had once accompanied the straw sandals youth through thousands of mountains and rivers. Whenever he was homesick, the youth would think of the streets of his hometown, the locust tree in the small town, and the regular tree in the mountains. Whenever his stomach was rumbling, he would think of the fragrance of scrambled eggs with leeks and dried celery. It would make an ignorant youth unable to help but think about the cloud guard envoy, the snow-clothed lady, the white jade chopsticks, and the purple gold pill. He said in the book that there is no secret to the pause pleasure. There is only the method of taking a step back. When I read this, I felt that this senior was right. It seemed to be like this. There are a lot of things that cannot be avoided. It is impossible to avoid. What else can be done? Really can't be done." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "But I didn't expect that Li Shilang gave another example at the end of the book. It was about the summer season. There were a lot of mosquitoes in the tent. The traveler was staying at the post house and couldn't bear the disturbance. Then the village head said something. The reason that Li Shilang wanted to use was that there is no need to lead others to take a step back. Because the reason is very simple, in this life, who hasn't faced adversity? Therefore, comparing the past to the present, I don't know the pain, but I feel happy. Therefore, every time after I practice my boxing, or when I come across something, I feel more and more that Li Shilang's words seem to have made a certain reason clear, leaving no room for discussion. But he himself said that his intention was to advise and punish, but he won't say it clearly. Isn't that strange?" Pei Qian opened his eyes wide. Shifu said that when you are your enemy, you don't need to be anxious to compare yourself with others. If you want me today to be better than me yesterday, tomorrow I will be better than me today. Is this the reason? Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. That's right. Otherwise, do you think that Shifu's reason is to catch me when I fall from the sky? Chen Pinggan raised his wine bowl and turned his head to look out the window. Then he suddenly drained it in one gulp. It could be considered a distant toast to Li Shilang to express his heartfelt gratitude. In a garden in Lizhong City, the white-haired old scholar stood shoulder to shoulder with Li Shilang. Looking at the ripples in the pond, he smiled and said, "This flattery, this kind of intention, do you accept it or not?" Li Shilang snorted coldly and said, "So what if this kid admires me? There are more than millions of people in the world who admire my talent and knowledge. This kid is incomparably slippery. Could it be that he thinks I am that stupid person who uses a stick and a date? I dare say that kid is very clear that you and I are listening at the side right now. Because he already knows that if he calls Li Shilang by name, I will be able to sense it." The old scholar clicked his tongue. Li Shilang's expression immediately relaxed. He stroked his beard and smiled. It's just that these heartfelt words can't be grasped at the last moment. Sincerity can be seen at a glance. The old scholar nodded in agreement. He is indeed the hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He even dared to scheme against the ship owner. To be able to be schemed against by him, to be able to make such a shrewd junior admire him, Li Shilang can be considered to have gained a lot of face this time. Li Shilang nodded and said, "That daoist green ox only knows how to eat melons." In one of the 4 cities under the ship that night, the middle-aged scholar concealed his figure and came to a banquet. The banquet was filled with red strings and jade-green sleeves. The candlelight was uneven. Those who looked at it would suspect that it was an immortal. A woman was playing the zither. On the main seat was the handsome man who took the initiative to give the position of city lord to Xiao Baohuan. His nickname was Beautiful Jew. The middle-aged scholar took another step and silently came to another place. He smiled and asked a man with a blurry figure, "You and Chen Pinggan were once colleagues in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, right? Why did you let Xiao Baohuan attack him? Was it because you had some agreement with the previous criminal official, Wen Haiju, that you had no choice but to do so?" The man whose face even the ship owner could not see clearly was the criminal official in the prison of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. There, he took in a young sword cultivator as his direct disciple. His name was Du Shanyin. And this strange sword celestial who was unknown in the records of the Summer Palace was the only one who attacked in the small world of the prison. It was the sword that killed the Ascendant Realm external demon, Wu Shuangjiang. After this person left the Great Wall of Sword Qi, he had been a guest on the night ship. At this moment, the man said to the ship owner, "Mr. Zhong, indifferently, it's just a business deal. There's a woman who wants to escape from the Aquarius continent." The middle-aged scholar smiled and said, "That's strange. Chen Pinggan is already on this ferry. Isn't it the best time for her to escape?" Taking a step back, Chen Pinggan went to the North Continent. Can he directly decide the changes in the situation at Zhengyang Mountain? The man said, "Tian Wan only did a divination. It seems like it has to be so to survive." The middle-aged scholar was puzzled and asked, "Is it that external demon hiding in the wick of the lamp?" He shook his head and said, "Even if there's that external demon, it's still not enough. In this place, even if the external demon is in the Ascendant Realm, it's still not useful." The man waved his hand and ordered him to leave. The middle-aged scholar just stood there and fell into deep thought. In the entry city, Ning Yarrow took out an oil lamp and gently twisted the wick to open a mountain restriction. Before the Great Wall of Sword Qi ascended and left, Chen Pinggan handed this oil lamp to the tailor and brought it with him to the 5th world. Now that Ning Yarrow was already an Ascendant Realm sword cultivator, then its existence was dispensable. A white-haired boy jumped out of the house and sat cross-legged in the air. He had a big forehead, a green snake, and 2 swords. He was wearing a daoist robe and his eyes were sparkling. He was probably bored in the small world. Now that he was forced to appear, he was still chewing on his fingers. An Ascendant Realm external demon, alias Wu Shuangjiang. In the prison of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, he asked Old Deaf to call him Grandpa. Old Deaf never hesitated and called him Grandpa. However, his green snake, 2 swords, and daoist robe had long been traded with Chen Pinggan. Now, they were just some pitiful and nostalgic camouflage. Now, he was a pauper. When he saw Chen Pinggan in green, the white-haired boy's face was full of disbelief. He was struck by lightning and his eyes were dull as if a lifetime had passed. He was about to cry. Then, his face was full of grievance as if his heart and lungs were hurt. Like a drop of thick ink dripping into clear water, it instantly became dizzy. He fell to the ground on his butt and moved his hands and feet. He wailed loudly and finally pounded his chest as if he was so sad that he couldn't say a word. He just sat on the ground and wailed. Chen Pinggan chewed on melon seeds and said with a sideways glance, "Stop." The white-haired boy stood up quickly and began to shout at the top of his lungs. His face was flushed red and he began to walk around a table. He raised his arms and shouted, "Hidden Officer Laozu, handsome, returning home in glory. His martial arts are unparalleled and he is invincible in the world. His fist is at the 11th realm and his swordsmanship is at the 15th realm." Pei Qian chewed on melon seeds and looked at this strange existence. It was just that his words were a little out of tune. Even she couldn't bear to listen to him. Compared to Guozhu Ju, it was much worse. Ju Meili mistakenly thought that this short winter melon was possessed by Jing Qing. Chen Pinggan said, "That's enough." The white-haired boy first flattered Ning Yarrow, Sister Ning really keeps her promise. You are indeed the most powerful person in the world for thousands of years. Ning Yarrow ignored him. Then, the white-haired boy ran to Chen Pinggan and asked carefully, Hidden Officer Laozu? How about that deal? Chen Pinggan said, You are already free. After Chen Pinggan returned to the world, he asked Kui Dongshan about Wu Shuangjiang. Only then did he know that the real Wu Shuangjiang could be ranked among the top 10 in the Qingming Tian. And the white-haired boy, as he expected, was the demon in Wu Shuangjiang's heart. He was even his Taoist companion on the mountain. Her real name was Tian Tian. That was the name on the registry of mountains and rivers. It seemed that there was no surname. However, Chen Pinggan felt that it was quite good to think that this otherworldly demon was Wu Shuangjiang. Back then, he had a good relationship with the young shopkeeper of the Stork Inn because of the ownership of this otherworldly demon. But in the end, there was some unhappiness between them. The white-haired boy sighed and was speechless. After so many hardships, he got what he wanted. Instead, he felt a little lost. He suddenly put his hands on his waist and said, Who are those two? That bun and that short winter melon, what are they doing? How dare they sit at the same table with my hidden officer Laozu? Did I borrow your guts? Heh! Don't you understand human language? Hurry up and sit on the ground. Pei Qian chuckled. Ju Meili scratched her head. She was not afraid at all. The next moment, this otherworldly demon of the Ascendant Realm suddenly showed an illusory Dharma form. It instantly propped up the heaven and earth of the city. After slightly bending its knees and bowing its head, it took in the mountains and rivers on the ground. Then, it rotated its sleeves, and the starlight scattered between heaven and earth. It instantly put away its Dharma form and starlight, and its body shrank back to its original form. Except for Chen Pinggan, Ning Yarrow, and Pei Qian, who had a pair of shining eyes, even the patrolling cavalry did not notice this ripple of qi activity. Even the towering Dharma form could not be seen at all. Only Li Shilang and the old scholar raised their heads and found something unusual. It could be seen that Wu Shuangjiang's magical power was very high. No wonder Kui Dongshan said that this palace master was about to become the latest 14th realm great cultivator in the Qingming world. The white-haired boy swaggered and sat on the empty bench opposite Chen Pinggan. He put his hands on the table and was about to stand up. Suddenly, he lowered his head and saw that the little girl in black could not step on the ground, so it did not matter. He continued to sit, picked some melon seeds for himself, and began to eat them. Then, he lowered his voice and said, Old ancestor Ingguan, what is this place? It's quite strange. If you look outside, it's dark. The host here is at least at the Ascendant Realm. Don't tell me this is our own mountain. Oh my God, it's really a big family. Then we're really rich. Chen Pinggan said, We're on a ferry. The white-haired boy was stunned. He leaned forward and did not care about eating melon seeds. He reached out to cover his mouth and urged, Old ancestor Ingguan, when shall we do it? If we don't do it, we'll lose our elegance and face. It's dark now, so it's the best time to do it. With you, Sister Ning, and me on the side, we'll be in charge of holding the line. What ferry? It'll be our property from tomorrow onwards. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Then you'll go and explore the way first. He sighed and continued to eat melon seeds, pretending that he did not say anything. It found that there was some junk on the table. Eating sunflower seeds was boring, so it stood on the bench and began to fiddle with the virtual objects. There was a small bundle of dried plum branches, a small porcelain pot with a simple shape of daffodil, an iron-cast flower artifact, and an ebony paperweight with the name Shu Yi. He suddenly felt a little sad. He slowly raised his head and looked at the guy who was drinking opposite him. He rubbed the corner of his eyes and said with a bitter face, Old ancestor Ingguan, you've returned to your hometown, but why are you getting worse and worse? Chen Pinggan. He suddenly asked carefully, Did anyone look for you at the inverted hanging mountain? Chen Pinggan did not hide anything. He nodded and said, They did, but I rejected them. He stood on the bench and asked with a smile, That was then. What about now? Chen Pinggan could not even protect himself at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. It was uncertain whether he could return to his hometown, so he rejected them. Now that he had returned to the vast world, what would happen? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, I promised you. So for the next 80 years, even if Wu Shuang comes, as long as I'm here, you'll be free. A young worker who was napping at the counter suddenly raised his head and yawned. He rested his chin on one hand and said with a smile, Young man, you talk so big. Won't you stuff yourself to death? The white-haired boy's face instantly turned pale. Chen Pinggan said, I've made Court Chief Wu wait. The young worker smiled and asked, What do you say now? Are you going to take back your arrogant words and earn a small favor from me? Or are you going to stop me? Chen Pinggan took out a talisman and said with a smile, Since Court Chief Wu is proficient in divination and predicted that I would come to this night sailing ship, you've been waiting for me. To be safe, why don't I make an exception and temporarily restore my cultivation to its peak and perform a divination as a 14th level great cultivator? Otherwise, I might fail miserably. It's easy to come to the vast world, but difficult to return to the green netherworld. As for Court Chief Wu's exception, it'll definitely break the rule we made with the Confucian Temple. However, I can use my merits to smooth things over with the Confucian Temple. The middle-aged scholar had a helpless expression. He did not even notice Wu Shuang's arrival at the night sailing ship. The officer said, That's a good thing. Other than Ning Yao, who is a surprise to everyone, if Chen Pinggan really did have a trump card prepared beforehand, as long as he goes up against Wu Shuangjiang, the truth will come to light. The middle-aged scholar clicked his tongue in wonder and said, regardless of whether he has a trump card or not, he's indeed worthy of his title as a secluded official since he dares to challenge a 14th level great cultivator. He then sighed and said, I want to witness the prowess of a 14th level cultivator, but I don't want to attract the attention of the Confucian Temple. It's really difficult. He turned to look at the man and said jokingly, with Xiao Baojuan's luck, he should have a place there like you and Tian Wan. Chen Pinggan had lost a portion of Taoism's fate regarding the bramble bow with the bearded guest. The man nodded and said, I can consider it. The young waiter of the inn stood up. It was obvious that this court chief of the Sui Chu Palace who had ascended to the 14th level would not perform a divination. With a slight movement of his sleeve, Chen Pinggan took out a talisman. There was nothing profound about it. He had merely used the talisman technique to move a mountain onto a piece of paper and draw an ordinary mountain top. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Court Chief Wu, do you really want to give it a try? The Sui Chu Palace Chief Wu Shuangjiang, who had quietly rushed to the righteous world and boarded the ship, sneered. Chen Pinggan instantly took out his natal flying sword and let Pei Qian and the white-haired boy protect Xiaomi. A sparrow in a cage. Chen Pinggan and Ning Yao stood side by side. Apart from the absence of Pei Qian and the other two, the small world seemed to be normal. The next moment, there were no living immortals in the entire city. There were only Chen Pinggan and Ning Yao who were carrying swords on their backs. A sparrow in a cage. Within the small world, all the streets and buildings turned into flying swords. Wu Shuangjiang put his hands behind his back and took the lead to walk out of the street. He leisurely looked at the flying sword's natal Abhina and took the lead to walk to the empty and quiet street. The talisman in Chen Pinggan's sleeve flashed with spiritual light and disappeared instantly. Wu Shuangjiang frowned slightly. Chen Pinggan extended his hand and unsheathed Night Ranger. He squinted his eyes and said, Then, shall we try the 14th level? Ning Yao smiled. A white-robed youth suddenly appeared and struck a palm with his fist. All right, mister. A slender man in a long green robe and cloth shoes raised his hand. A willow leaf spun between his fingers as he laughed at Wu Shuangjiang, the 14th level. You scared me to death. 776. A bunch of caged sparrows seemed to be independent in the city of night sailing ships. Other than the two opposing sides with a great disparity in numbers, there were no other outsiders in the world. Under the green underworld, Suizha Palace Master Wu Shuangjiang was the newest 14th realm Qi cultivator in several realms. Chen Pinggan, Jade Unpolished Realm Sword Cultivator, 10th realm martial artist. Ning Yao, the first Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator in the 5th realm. Kui Dongshan, Immortal Realm Qi Cultivator. Jiyu Shu Dragon Body. Jiang Shangzhen, Immortal Realm Sword Cultivator. Falling from Ascendant Realm. Wu Shuangjiang stood on the street with one hand behind his back and the other hand twirling the hair on his temples. He smiled calmly and sized up the young man in white from the corner of his eyes. Po Kui Dong. Po Xiu Hu. Chen Pinggan suddenly reached out and grabbed Ning Yao's arm. In a flash, his figure dissipated and disappeared without a trace. As the owner of a bunch of caged sparrows, he actually took the initiative to leave this small world. Wu Shuangjiang glanced at the entrance of the inn. His fingers twirling the hair on his temples paused slightly. He did not say a word and there was not the slightest ripple of aura. Jiang Shangzhen's willow leaf was the direction of his flying sword. It slashed down in the void between Chen Pinggan and Wu Shuangjiang. It drew a verdant sword-light arc and directly cut off Wu Shuangjiang's Dao technique without warning. After the Dao technique was cut, it was a snow-white talisman paper that floated to the ground. It was like a child folding paper. It folded into the shape of a slender snake. At that moment, it was like two headless white snakes wriggling on the ground. It was obvious that the talisman snake had actually followed Chen Pinggan out of the caged sparrow. It would not let Chen Pinggan leave without leaving a trace. Wu Shuangjiang slightly chanted and the white snake folded from the snow-white talisman paper on the ground dissipated. Talisman paper was just a self-made snowflake letter paper of Suasia Palace. In the green underworld, it was the most suitable letter paper for Dao companions to entrust their lovesickness. This was the magical ability of a 14th level cultivator. It could easily turn something rotten into something magical. In the vision of Wu Shuangjiang's mind, there was a light somewhere outside the small world. It was extremely bright, but soon, the light seemed to be covered by layers of lantern covers and gradually became blurry. In the blink of an eye, it became dim, and there was no trace left. Wu Shuangjiang smiled. It definitely wasn't Ning Yao's flying sword. This talisman didn't have anything special about it. The only wonderful thing about it was that the talisman paper could be cut and broken, but it couldn't be turned into nothingness, unless someone could refine the talisman into their own. So, just in case, he drew a talisman on the snowflake letter. It was very simple. In fact, it was just two names: Chen Pinggan and Ning Yao. Therefore, it became a long-lost talisman of marriage. Could it be that the young hidden official had used an unorthodox divine ability? It was a good move, and the response was appropriate. It wasn't some universe creator technique. With Chen Pinggan's cultivation at the unpolished jade boundary, such a rash move would only bring trouble to himself. Jiang Shangzhen put away his flying sword and used his fingers to gently wipe away the snow-white fragments of the willow leaf. He sighed and said with a sad expression, "Old Immortal Wu, you really have a good plan. You've immediately made me reveal my background. What should I do? Why don't we all sit down and have a good chat?" After his cultivation fell, Jiang Shangzhen's life flying sword had been broken from a complete willow leaf to a broken willow leaf. According to common sense, the world believed that old sect master Jiang's combat strength had fallen. That snow-white talisman paper was like a whetstone used to sharpen the sword. Although it was cut in half like tofu, Wu Shuangjiang was still able to rely on this to instantly determine the fierceness of the flying sword. As expected of Jiang Shangzhen. Not only is he gifted, but the key is that he's ruthless enough. He's a natural Dao fusing embryo. It's not without reason that he's able to cause trouble everywhere and live until today. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and was very understanding. He said slowly, "Actually, there's no need to deliberately delay. It's not easy for me to come to the righteous world, so I'm not in a hurry to leave. You can do whatever you want and experience the most outstanding people among the young people of the righteous world. Ning Yao, Chen Pinggan, the white-robed youth with half-embroidered tiger embroidery, and Jiang Shangzhen of Tongya continent." To Wu Shuangjiang, even Jiang Shangzhen, who was the oldest, was still a junior. He was still a young man in his prime. Jiang Shangzhen's fall in cultivation was extremely dangerous and ingenious. Simply speaking, he used the fall in cultivation to sharpen that piece of willow leaf. The flying sword of a willow leaf was real, but its sharpness still far exceeded that of Jiang Shangzhen's willow leaf when he was in the immortal realm. The price was that Jiang Shangzhen's cultivator physique was much more damaged than before and became relatively weak. That was why Jiang Shangzhen now had white hair on his temples and looked like he was old. In other words, Jiang Shangzhen's fall in cultivation was real, absolutely real. However, the quality of that natal flying sword was almost equivalent to leaving it in the ascendant realm. It was just that Jiang Shangzhen was too shrewd. He had always used the fall in cultivation as the best camouflage to deceive the world. Jiang Shangzhen really did not hold back. He flipped his wrist and a pot of wine appeared. He said with a sincere face, "Since we hit it off, how about a pot of wine first?" When the small talk was over, it would not be a competition to determine the winner. Instead, it would be a life-and-death battle with Wu Shuangjiang. As long as Wu Shuangjiang dared to be arrogant, that would be the best. However, no one would underestimate Wu Shuangjiang. After all, he was a cultivator who could teach each other how to be a person. Kui Dongshan stood on the roof of a shop, and a mountain walking stick suddenly appeared in his hand. He waved his hands in a circle, and ripples appeared. Layers of halos rippled, and layers of halos appeared. It was like a golden painting scroll, and a pocket-sized sun was hanging in the sky. Kui Dongshan laughed and said, "Palace Master Wu, nice to meet you." He reached out and grabbed the pocket-sized white sun in his hand. He shook his wrist and the ball rolled away like a palm. It spun and shone in all directions. The white-clothed youth's 5 fingers moved slightly. 28 characters appeared around the ball. They were like a star array. The 4 divisions of heaven and earth and the 28 mansions array diagram appeared one after another. Wu Shuangjiang did not have the slightest murderous aura. He ignored the white-clothed youth shaking his palm. Instead, he seemed to be catching up with Kui Dongshan. He smiled and nodded, "It's a pity that I can't see Xiao Hu." However, to be able to see half of him, this trip was not in vain. Mr. Kui's current appearance was of good quality. What Lu Chen said was true. The disciple of an old elementary scholar is indeed an expert. Others can only be envious of him. As he spoke, Wu Shuangjiang put 2 fingers together and pulled lightly. He pulled out the body of the young worker from the inn, who had been taken over by him. Like a piece of paper, he folded the body and casually put it into his sleeve. The Year Palace removal Wu Shuang descended, revealing her true body. This frequent guest of the Green Darkness World 10 only had the appearance of a middle-aged man, nothing out of the ordinary. However, his aura condensed, and the great Tao manifested. A faintly discernible Dharma idol as tall as a person appeared. Scarlet heaven robe, purple knot scarf, white cloud shoes, and stood in the clouds. There was a red mark between the eyebrows of the Dharma idol, as if it had opened the heavenly eye. Colorful ribbons were wrapped around its arms, lingering and fluttering. Behind the Dharma idol, there was a circle of solidified Dharma idol halo. Jiang Shangzhen stood at the end of the street and rubbed his chin. He knew that Wu Shuang's great Tao aura was the so-called sign of heaven. Attuning to the great Tao and becoming one with the world was the 14th level. The only and biggest problem was that he didn't know where Wu Shuangjiang's 14th level was. Therefore, Jiang Shangzhen smiled and asked, "May I ask how Great Palace Master Wu integrated? Please tell me. You don't have to worry about scaring me out of my wits." As soon as he asked this question, even Jiang Shangzhen was somewhat impressed by his own sincerity. As expected, one is marked by the company one keeps. After interacting with the mountain chieftain for a long time, he would be influenced by her and treat others with sincerity. Wu Shuangjiang smiled and said, "Harmony." Jiang Shangzhen smiled bitterly, muttering over and over again what to do. Kui Dongshan's expression was solemn, like a chicken pecking rice, echoing Chief Ju from afar. The 14th level of Tao integration was very troublesome, so troublesome that it couldn't be more troublesome. Especially the 14th level of Tao integration, which outsiders only knew about but didn't know what Tao integration was. That was the most troublesome existence. If Wu Shuangjiang were to integrate Tao integration at the right time or in the right place, it would be much better than integrating harmony. Bai Yi wielded his sword and supported the Yarrow continent. He challenged several sovereigns with his sword and still had the upper hand, completely ignoring the encirclement. One of the reasons was that he was the proudest of the human world, the poem in the heart of Tao integration. As long as the poem didn't stop, he would be invincible. It was really too mysterious. In addition, Bai Yi wielded one of the 4 celestial swords, Tai Bai, which made him even more unreasonable. The former head of the Lotus Nunnery in the desolate world, the talisman Yu Xian, who oversaw the dazzling Milky Way, had been yearning and working hard all his life, hoping for the location of Tao integration. It was the right time, the seemingly unchanging sun, moon, and stars. In a sense, it was the veritable Tao and immortality. The blind old man integrated the Tao integration of the 100,000 mountains, and the sage of literature integrated the Tao integration of the vast 3 continents. Bai Yi integrated the poem in the heart of Tao integration, which was harmony. Su Zi and the mellow scholar Chen Chunan of the South Sura continent were also walking on this path. Other than that, there were also sword cultivators. For example, the long-bearded hero Liu Cha, who was the 3rd highest sovereign stage great demon in the beginning. Above the sea, by the shore of the ultimate, this sword cultivator who had reached the 14th level was beaten back to the ascendant stage from the 14th level by Chen Chunan. Because of this, Liu Cha couldn't return to the desolate world. Instead, he was detained in the Merit and Virtue Forest by the Confucian Temple. The previous hidden official, Xiao Chuo, betrayed the Great Wall of Sword Qi and took a shortcut to the Martyr's Palace in the wilderness. Although she was only at the 14th level of the Immortal Soul 3rd level, she had the geographical advantage and had lost the greatest reliance of a sword cultivator, which was the great freedom of being unfettered by heaven and earth. This was also the reason why Xiao Chuo couldn't fight with the left and right sides in the alien battlefield even though she was 1 level higher than them. It was also the reason why the left and right sides were determined to stop Xiao Chuo from returning to the desolate world. Jiang Shangzhen asked, "Brother Kui, the more I look at it, the scarier it is. What do you think?" Kui Dongshan said seriously, "You should be thick-skinned and beg for mercy from Palace Master Wu. Didn't Chief Ju notice? He said that we can do whatever we want, but Palace Master Wu is the one who hasn't been idle the most. Facing such a strong enemy, since we can't win in a battle of strength and wits, we can only admit defeat." Wu Shuangjiang smiled knowingly. Among the Daoist officials of the Qingming world, there was a popular golden rule that when a cultivator of the lower 5 realms faced a cultivator of the middle 5 realms, and then used the spells and divine abilities of a cultivator of the upper 5 realms, there would be less accidents. Wu Shuangjiang still had one hand behind his back and snapped his fingers with the other. 3 natal flying swords were flying around him. They were the caged sparrow, the moon in the well, and a willow leaf. Of course, they were imitation swords. However, Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen didn't think that the imitation swords of the Sword Hatred Mountain in the North Continent could be compared to these 3. Kui Dongshan said, "Fortunately, it can only last for the time it takes to burn an incense stick." Jiang Shangzhen said with a sad look, "Mountain Master's hands-off boss is very unpredictable." Wu Shuangjiang used his fingertip to press against the caged sparrow imitation sword and smiled. "Then, may I invite you to tour the Sparrow Tower with me?" In an instant, the scenery of the world changed completely. There was a tall building standing on the bank of the river. It was none other than the Stork Tower of the Qingming Heavenly Palace. Wu Shuangjiang waved his sleeves, and the moon in the well flashed past. The water of the river rose, like rain clouds hanging upside down on the earth. Finally, rain fell from the sky. Countless raindrops shot up, and every raindrop was a flying sword. There were millions of flying swords. Kui Dongshan, who was floating in the air, knocked the green bamboo cane in his hand heavily and smiled. "Since ancient times, let's go to the past and catch a big fish upstream." Go back. The words of the Confucian sage were like the heavenly law, and the river of time flowed in reverse. The 3 of them returned to the real world of the caged sparrow. In fact, the 2 times the flowing water of time passed by Wu Shuangjiang, it took a detour. Kui Dongshan stood on one leg like a golden rooster. With one hand raised high, he held the white sun in his palm while the other pointed at Wu Shuangjiang with the mountain treading staff. The 4 directions are called the universe. Let this junior teach court chief Wu what a small world is. In fact, Before Kui Dongshan made that comical pose, the world had already been formed. Wu Shuangjiang kept the 3 imitation swords in his sleeves. Looking at his posture, he was going to use them to refine the void into reality. Wu Shuangjiang took a step forward for the first time. The moment he took a step, the celestial form behind him overlapped with his true body, and a majestic Dharma form appeared on the spot. It was millions of feet tall, and compared to the indomitable scene of the otherworldly demon in Lizhong City, it was even more exaggerated. It was as if it was about to open up a canopy of Kui Dongshan's world. When it took its second step, the Dharma form held up the sky with one hand and swept its other arm. The originally stable world instantly became chaotic, and countless torrents of Tao techniques appeared. Each and every strand was as large as a raging river that broke through a dam. They surged through the world, and a slight sound of silk tearing could be heard. Kui Dongshan sneered. He twirled the green bamboo cane with 2 fingers and drew a circle. He pinched his fingers and silently recited the teachings of the sage. The world that included Wu Shuangjiang and the Dharma form was cut apart and condensed into a mustard seed. Jiang Shangzhen no longer hesitated. He took out a rare copy of the Mountain Search painting from his sleeve. It was known as the Peaceful Edition of the Mountain, and its seniority was only slightly lower than the founding ancestor. He threw out the painting scroll and enveloped the mustard seed world within it, using the world to envelop the world. At the same time, Jiang Shangzhen seemed to have received an imperial order. The small world of the caged sparrow suddenly opened, allowing Jiang Shangzhen to leave this place without leaving a trace. Kui Dongshan pressed his palms together and suddenly twisted them. The world changed, turning into a large swamp. Countless flood dragons were entrenched in it, and countless sword gleams crisscrossed within. When he arrived outside the small world of the caged sparrow, Jiang Shangzhen saw the young hill master who was meticulously setting up the array. The 2 of them only looked at each other and smiled knowingly. They did not exchange any words. Jiang Shangzhen disappeared in a flash once again. He flipped his sleeves, and another world stood tall. It was an ancient arcane realm ruin that Jiang Shangzhen had refined. It was called the Willow Shade Land. A flying sword, the caged sparrow, a mustard seed world of the constellation painting, and a mountain search formation. There were already 3 small worlds. One of Kui Dongshan's small world of the heart image, the great swamp of ancient Shu. The Willow Shade Land that Jiang Shangzhen had refined. In addition to the lawless place that Chen Pinggan was responsible for setting up the array, there were another 3 small grotto heavens. In the next moment, Kui Dongshan quickly passed by the Willow Shade Land and went outside, creating another world. In the next moment, Chen Pinggan met Kui Dongshan face to face again. He spread out a sword immortal painting scroll that he had brought back from the Great Wall of Sword Chi to the peak of Luopa Mountain. Ning Yarrow, who had nothing to do, was only responsible for overseeing it. It was not that the small worlds of cultivators were worthless, but that Chen Pinggan and the other 2, especially Jiang Shangzhen and Kui Dongshan, who had many magic treasures, could not be judged by common sense. Previously, outside the Mirage City of the Great Quan Empire, Chen Pinggan was alone. Wen Jian, Pei Minute, Kui Dongshan, and Jiang Shangzhen did not have a chance to make a move. After that, the 3 of them stayed at Luopa Mountain and chatted for a night. In the end, they even invited Shan Jun, Wei Pai, and Liu Jinglong to come up with a plan. The 3 mountains talisman that Chen Pinggan had taken out earlier was one of his earliest ideas on the mountain. It was the most crucial move on the chessboard. It was worthy of being called the unreasonable move. Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen both had identical mountain talismans in their hands. This meant that no matter who encountered a difficult opponent who was bound to lose in a one-on-one fight, they could take out this talisman and summon the other 2 to instantly enter the battlefield. In the beginning, they used the swordsman Pei Minute as an imaginary opponent. Later, the 3 of them did not even let go of the talisman Yu Xian and the great celestial master of Longhu Mountain. They were all invited to the chessboard one by one. Of course, they could also use it to deal with a protector who might be behind Tian Wan. In short, they were all aiming for ascendant realm sword cultivators like Pei Minute. Even if they were to use it to deal with Wu Shuangjiang, who was a 14th level great cultivator, it was still the same sentence. If the three of them worked together, they could risk their lives. After all, Wu Shuangjiang came from the Green Netherworld. He was in a similar situation as Lu Chen when he traveled to Lizhu Grotto Heaven. There were many rules and restrictions. Even if he was driven to desperation, Wu Shuangjiang had no choice but to restore his 14th level cultivation base. That would violate the rules of the Sage of Rites. Naturally, he would be suppressed by the Great Way. Moreover, the situation had changed now. There was an Ascendant Realm Sword cultivator, Ning Yaro. Not only was she an Ascendant Realm cultivator, she was also proficient in fighting. Therefore, whether it was Ning Yaro guarding the formation from the side or making the final decision, there was no doubt that she was the best candidate. However, according to the three of them, they did not expect Ning Yaro to be involved in the battlefield. Even if she was an Ascendant Realm Sword cultivator, she could only take charge of one of them. This was because the superposition of the small worlds were interconnected. Every step was taken carefully. The slightest difference was the difference between heaven and earth. The order of the formation of each small world was very particular, not to mention the mystery within. Ning Yaro had no qualms about this. She quietly waited for Wu Shuangjiang. Earlier, she had heard Chen Pinggan say that these small worlds were used to entertain the guests. They were just the first moves. Kui Dongshan and Jiang Shangzhen shook their sleeves in the various worlds. Magic weapons fell like rain. This was Luorpa Mountain's way of entertaining guests. The higher the realm, the more money they spent, and the more attention they paid. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,